my recent mission to apparently upload for every semi-relevant holiday, I've prepared this video on the Queen's birthday, celebrated in New Zealand for Queen Mary, or Elizabeth II. Welcome to episode 17 of my Dark Aspects series, where I uncover the more adult moments in the bottomless library of Nintendo's family-friendly games. I have a very special episode prepared today because I've done it. During this period of isolation, I've quelled my greatest sin as a Mother fan and finally completed all of EarthBound Beginnings. I did buy and download the game when it first released, but it always intimidated me. So it's been sitting there like a dust ghost, or the phantom of Miiverse haunting me. All I can say is I'm thrilled to have made this journey, wholly experiencing what provided the foundation for some of my favorite games of all time. It's so inspiring too that a Famicom title from 1989, 6 whole years before I was born, could affect me this much. With that said, it's about time I made a Dark Aspects on this first game. My EarthBound episode is the earliest video you can watch on the channel, and I have a lot to thank for that first ever analytical video. It's admittingly a little embarrassing looking back on, mostly my unwavering monotone, the poor quality footage, and lack of polish, but I'll always leave it up for the memories. With the knowledge I have on the franchise now though, and having played the game several times over, I wanted to not only redo the video that helped this channel grow, but cover all 3 of the games this time around. But the thing is, this is Dark Aspects of Mother we're talking about. It's going to be a big project spanning several parts as the franchise, while it may not look it, holds some of the most mature moments in Nintendo's history. So let's hop in a phase distorter and go back in time to the late 80s so I can explain myself. Wait, shoot, it's all in Japanese. They didn't release the game overseas at the time. Okay, well, let's just go forward again to 2015 and play it on the Wii U. This is the first official English release 26 years later. Mother 1, localized as EarthBound Beginnings, stars not Ness, but Ninten. While the name Ninten is a little silly, it's cool the 2 characters share a connection, Ness being an anagram of SNES, and whose name comes from the OG Nintendo Entertainment System. The novelization, written by Saori Kumi, as requested by Itoi himself, calls the character Ken if you prefer, but it really doesn't matter as you can call him anything you want anyway. Inspired by The Legend of Zelda's Link being a link between the player and the character, I've always just named game protagonists after myself, but for the purpose of discussing the series, his name is Ninten. Moving past the naming screen though, I've always loved how the opening sets the stage for the story, which is the game's major selling point and what I'll be explaining briefly now. In the early 1900s, George and Maria, a married couple living in the American countryside, were abducted from their home by aliens. During this time away, Maria began raising Geeg, an alien child destined to become a leader of the intergalactic army. While Maria started to love Geeg like her own child, George especially took to the aliens' psychokinetic powers, studying them without permission. Stealing this newfound information, George somehow managed to escape back to Earth, where he continued his research in total isolation while his wife never returned. 80 years have passed since then, when Geeg's presence is felt once again in strange phenomena across the country, like poltergeists attacking a boy's house in Podunk. That boy happens to be Ninten, a descendant of George, wielding psi powers of his very own. Because of this, it's understood that Ninten is likely the key to saving this world from Geeg's invasion. It's known that all of the games in this series have supernatural horror elements in them, but in the case of this one, it's surprising just how early on these happenings occur, with a starting quest to find Pippi, a girl gone missing and last seen in Podunk's cemetery. The town's graveyard is home to a great many zombies, consisting of, according to the Mother Encyclopedia, soldiers killed in action and martyred gangsters. Indeed, zombie gang leaders can be challenged, but their scare factor was toned down considerably in localization. In the initial Japanese release, the mobster's cause of death can be discerned quite easily by what looks like several gunshot wounds. The censored enemies don't stop there though. Any hint of blood on their sprites were covered up, whether it's obvious dripping blood or just a misconstrued red pixel on a lab coat. Cigarette-smoking gang members and even crows kicked the habit, which would become a reflection of the author, as Itoi himself quit in 2003. It was the same year the Japanese Game Boy Advance port was released, retaining all these edits likely to appease the then new Sero rating system. This is getting a bit off topic, but Itoi wrote a book about his experience quitting smoking, claiming to have at most smoked 80 cigarettes a day. That same Mother encyclopedia I mentioned earlier features a somewhat related blurb about one of the main characters too, Teddy. Now, Teddy apparently realized his love for fighting at age 5. He switched from chocolate cigarettes to the real thing on his 10th birthday, and found himself in a patrol car for the first time the following year. His favorite brand of cigarettes are called Horse Shit, which, believe it or not, had a real-world equivalent sold in Mexico. Poor Teddy, though. In the game, he joins the party to avenge his parents, killed by monsters in the mountains Geeg is attacking from. He was reportedly a gentle boy before the incident, and we can infer that he became the leader of the Blah Blah Gang, called Black Blood Gang in Japanese, at age 14 as a result. I won't go into too much more detail using external resources for backstory, but just know that he supposedly punched out the teeth of an eyewear shop's owner because they didn't carry sunglasses. This encounter inspired the shop owner to start selling Teddy Glass, named after his attacker. Getting back to the game, even the Japanese script is a bit heavier. As an example, the ominous voice calling out to Ninten's party when wandering the haunted Rosemary Mansion is much more blunt. Less threatening, but still worth mentioning, is a resident of Reindeer, recalling a walk through the tunnel once when they were young. It was a trip made to see a dead body, which is a clear shout out to Stand By Me, a known inspiration for Itoi, and the short story the film was based on. The reference is unfortunately dropped completely in Beginnings. One exception to the Famicom version being surprisingly less intense, though, is the Marysville surgeon Ben Casey. He was renamed Old Sawbones Benny for the English release. And if that name somehow didn't deter you, the doc, after healing everyone, tells the party to go get hurt again and come back soon before giggling. If his service is flat out refused, however, he'll morbidly respond with, "Fine, die all on your own, I'll phone a mortician." What a terrible thing to tell a group of kids! Socially distancing from bitter physicians and moving along to the desert, the party is left little opportunity for conversation, so they may find themselves chatting up a skeleton or two. One corpse says, "I am just a pile of bones now. I used to be a nice guy before." It's a quirk of all three games to be able to converse with remains, and the associated text is usually silly. But in this instance, it's specifically a human that's perished here, which is a little surprising. Another corpse used for a more serious matter can be found on the railroad tracks. It warns Nintendo and company to get on the train or you will have a hard time like me. Yikes. Lastly, while it's probably not the best time to be mentioning this, considering, our worldwide state of affairs, one NPC expresses shock about someone dying from a cold. A different character even outright says, "Don't catch your death of cold." I'm bringing this up because considering the many instances of Nintendo writing around the words dying and death, it's surprising to see just how many times they're uttered in this game. But moving past simple allusions to death, this game treats it as a major theme too. Going back to Teddy when he's recruited near the end of the game, an unwinnable battle against a giant robot leaves the troubled teen fatally wounded. Teddy can no longer assist the heroes in this state, and his dialogue heavily implies that he won't be surviving his injuries. The doctor stays quiet, insisting Lloyd take Teddy's place in battle, with Teddy himself not speaking again. It's a pretty intense moment, and in the Japanese version, that was it. His story ended here, leaving his fate up to interpretation. Only in the GBA port, which again came out in 2003, did Japanese fans receive closure in the form of an extended ending, outlining his recovery. Teddy was lucky, but depending on how you play, the flying men won't get a happy ending. These noble, humanoid creatures are found within the realm of Magicant, marking their first appearance in the series as one of the sadder aspects overall. Their supposed destiny is to offer unwavering loyalty to Nintendo, fighting alongside the cast should the player choose to recruit them. Unlike the main party, who's always able to be revived after falling from battle, the flying men can't be brought back. Their death is permanent with each playthrough, so carelessness on the player's behalf, whether it's charging high-level enemies or neglecting to heal, carries an irreversible weight and guilt, unless you reset your save, but some would be against the idea. The Amazing Mother vocal album, which is sung in English, an odd choice I'm thankful for, has rather melancholic lyrics dedicated to the nature of flying men and their fleeting life. When the characters do fall in battle, they're buried under tombstones, displaying inscriptions that range from heartfelt to horrifying. One of them reads, "Nintendo's benevolent buddy, the brave soldier, flying man, rests here in peace." That's quite sad, but others begin with the harrowing, "To Nintendo's great sorrow," or "To Nintendo's horror and dismay." On the topic of Magicant, and to explain exactly what it is, the place is a dreamland formed by the mind of Queen Mary, who is, major spoiler warning, eventually revealed to be Maria, Nintendo's great-grandmother and Geeg's non-biological mother. She's a tragic figure who's essentially trapped herself in her own consciousness, a victim of amnesia in a state of limbo. She desperately tries to remember the lullaby she used to sing to her adoptive son, but can't. So in order to help fulfill the wish that keeps her tethered to this land, Nintendo is tasked with learning the 8 melodies that make up the song. Her plight is especially sad when considering the incomplete background music on the way to or from Magicant. If you listen carefully, the first few notes are reminiscent of the 8 melodies Nintendo's been gathering, but it soon becomes dissonant and broken up with pauses. This then has been interpreted by fans as Queen Mary attempting to sing the lullaby, but falling short every time. There's also this permeating sadness that can be felt throughout Magicant, likely providing insight into the person who imagined all this up. For example, Nintendo and company can eventually travel from their world to this one and back again at their leisure. But when the player wants to leave for the very first time, there's a strange exchange Nintendo must endure with a man who claims to be forgotten. He asks Nintendo to ignore him, and that his kindness is confusing. Because if he does, he won't be able to continue living alone anymore, and that's all the man's ever known. You have to agree to ignore this man so that he'll vanish, allowing Nintendo passage back into the real world. It's an encounter that, while odd, leaves you feeling rather empty, and considering Maria's connection to Magicant, this is quite probably a deep-rooted feeling inside of her. Everything from the cat swimming in the ground to the pairs of eyes attacking make up some part of her after all, so it's interesting to imagine all of what he represents in her mind. It looks like I'm starting to turn into a forgotten man too. Better check my audience retention. For those of you still here, join me back in reality by catching Dark Aspects of Mother Part 2, where I'll continue by exploring the game's emotional ending before diving into some more of what contributed to the higher age rating, like getting arrested for underage drinking. Dark Aspects of Nintendo, we shall meet again. Last time, I discussed the game's fascination with death, using it unabashedly as a means for storytelling. In this video, I'll be giving some more examples of that sentiment, as seen towards the end of the game, but first following the plot linearly to look at even more censorship, weighty themes, and a few candidates for that higher age rating. To begin, there's a handful of censored enemies I didn't bring up last time, but are still worth mentioning. The first being Teddy, with his confiscated knife during the one-on-one with Nintendo, which is funny because he can still equip an assortment of knives and swords otherwise. More interesting though are the female robots Nancy, Kelly, and Yuna. The original Japanese sprites are by no means crude, but America is easily offended, so what could be construed as nipples, I think that's the first time I've used that word in a video, are shadowed out. EarthBound Beginnings localizer Phil Sandhop himself reassures us that he personally has nothing against nipples, but says this in regard to the change. Quote, "They are robots and carry no function other than to suggest femaleness. Smoothing down the old sheet metal sounded like it'd be easier and look better than having them wear a top." Unquote. This is an unrelated but cool fact. These robots were actually renamed for the English version, in honor of lead staff members on the project. One of the scarier encounters, besides this hotel worker revealing himself to be a starman, is that of the fugitive, accompanied by a rope he likely used as a means for escape from wherever he was being held prisoner. In fact, many of these enemies look arguably more sinister than the creatures of EarthBound do, if they aren't the hilarious bear. Okay, I want this image on a t-shirt right now. The surprise factor of random encounters sometimes works to further fear as well. Enemy sprites didn't start appearing in the overworld until the sequel, so like any RPG of its time, you truly never know what's coming next. This game doesn't feature battle backgrounds either, settling instead on a static black screen. So in some ways, while likely an inadvertent choice due to hardware restrictions, there's an added sense of discomfort. Paired with the music, these trippy sequences in the later two games can be unsettling. But utter darkness speaks for itself, and until party members start to join you, the game's starting areas feel lonely. Speaking of loneliness, remember the forgotten man I mentioned in the last video? Well, don't. He's supposed to be forgotten. So let's instead think of a different vanishing act from an individual that may very well be a ghost. This girl in Spokane proposes 3 hints for $1,000 each. If you decline her offer like I did, the girl disappears without explanation. It's nothing too noteworthy, but I wasn't expecting this at all, and it certainly felt at least a little eerie. Getting back on track though, passing back into reality for the first time from Magicant takes Nintendo to Marysville, home of the aforementioned Sawbones Benny, where a lady expresses her distaste in the Duncan Enterprises plan to build a strip joint in town. One other mention of a strip theater under construction in Mother was removed entirely, but the fact that this reference wasn't changed into a strip mall or something for Beginnings is fairly surprising. A description that certainly was censored though is that of abuse, found in that same town's elementary school. In EarthBound Beginnings, a student says, "The gym teacher made me do extra push-ups again. I'd rather do sit-ups though." In Mother, that child says something very different instead. "The gym teacher hit me. Maybe I should drop out and become a thug." This theme of writing around child abuse would be seen later in the series with EarthBound and a certain major character. Speaking of totally innocent children, further along in the game is the disconcerting Youngtown. Ever since the party first met Anna back in Snowman, it's been rumored that her missing mother was last seen here, with other whispers of adults traveling to Youngtown and never returning. What's worse is that many are unaware there's a problem at all, while those concerned have no way of knowing what's happened. Standard visitation isn't possible after all, as the train is indefinitely out of commission by way of the broken track. So when the party makes the dangerous trek here by foot in hopes of a reunion, optimism soon crumbles away when it is confirmed that all the adults have disappeared. Youngtown is the second furthest from the others on the map, isolated more so, of course, by the travel suspension. So nobody knows these kids are suffering out here all on their own. In following the plot, it can be presumed that their parents were abducted by Geek's army, which is indeed verified at the end of the game. It isn't stated why exactly they're being held captive in these tubes. Their purpose in Mother 3 is specifically brainwashing, but regardless, this unsavory idea is a main theme present in every game. Getting back to the kids, they're obviously a bit traumatized and unsure of just what to do. The town is overgrown with weeds and unkempt foliage like the millions of abandoned Animal Crossing towns throughout the years. The children try to appear strong in conversation, but many of them do so in between sobbing, wanting Nintendo and company to hold them, which is sad. The party, still being kids themselves, are the only reassurance these younger children have. But this is just one stop in the adventure. The gang has to pass through. Nintendo can't save them yet, so it's anyone's guess as to just how long these kids are left alone. Lightening the mood a bit, in the next town over, a woman offers to buy Nintendo a drink, specifically a beer in Tomato's translation, at the live house because he's cute. Answering no will have her chastise the party for being worried about cops, while yes will result in said cops coming in to arrest everyone for being underage. Though the adult that actually bought you the drinks is okay. Talk about corruption. What do you know? A relevant theme that is, again, present in all three games. Another music fan at the live house warns about the repercussions of peeking in the back room to the left of the stage. Ignoring this, the person inside will scold you to get out of their dressing room, calling Nintendo a pervert in Mato's translation. Speaking of, it's clearer in Mother that this NPC is a peeping Tom. He can be caught looking through the window of a house that isn't his, claiming to be studying baths, interior architecture in EarthBound Beginnings, for a university project. General crime is clearly rampant in the bigger cities all throughout the game. It's especially prominent in Reindeer, and, well, where we got arrested, Valentine, localized as LA. You heard that right, LA, spelled out as a parody of Los Angeles. Outside of town is a secret isolated lab located past the Western Lookout Tower. It holds a group of scientists wanting to try out strawberry tofu. One of them will give Nintendo swear words in exchange, a usable item in battle, causing the party member to curse out the enemy. All that's really read is "I hate you," but the implication that an adult taught these children bad words is still there. A little unrelated, but when creator Shigesato Itoi tried strawberry tofu in real life for the first time, he described the dessert as having a profound, saddening flavor, which I find hilarious. It's probably my favorite Itoi-related thing ever. With all these lesser details out of the way though, I am going to now start talking about major plot spoilers that finish up the game, so be warned if you've been a bad fan like me and have put off the game for this long. Found on the journey up Mount Itoi, en route to Geek, is a robot guardian named Eve. Now, Eve was created by George to protect Nintendo and his friends when the time came, likely set as a countermeasure for when Geek's race would inevitably return. Even though Eve is just a machine, her sacrifice against an equally powerful robot is mournful. Her scraps provide the sixth melody not far from the summit, where the final piece of the song Nintendo can collect is located. That would be George's gravesite, which allows the boy to communicate with his ancestor. Being in contact with the spirit of Nintendo's great-grandfather through Eve, and then directly listening to his speech is heartfelt, perfectly setting up the emotional ride to come that is this game's ending. Presenting what's gathered of the song to Queen Mary back in Magicant, she is finally able to fully recite it. As this was what kept her spirit unable to pass on, the country of Magicant, which essentially acted as her purgatory, begins to dissipate with her singing until she's able to reunite with her husband in the afterlife. That means all of Magicant's inhabitants, while only a mirage born from Maria's mind, were very real to Nintendo, are wiped from existence and can never be visited again. The party wakes up at George's gravesite, with the mountain peak entrance now opened. The sole remaining task then is to finally confront Geeg, now appearing by Mothership. As with every final boss in the Mother series, brute force can't be used to win, or any physical force at all for that matter. The only way to weaken Geeg is to sing back the melodies that kept Maria in limbo, the song his human mother used to sing to him as a baby. Ever since George stole information, presumably psi, that could be used against the alien race, Geeg was made to invade Earth and eradicate the threat to his people. However, it can be discerned that this isn't what Geeg truly wants. In a twist of fate, he offers to spare Nintendo, and Nintendo alone, as he owes a great deal to the boy's family line. But when the last link to his beloved mother refuses to join forces, he must proceed with the plan of destroying humankind. This leads to battle, but still gravely missing his mother, Geeg is overcome with feelings of sentiment and nostalgia in the form of her lullaby. Geeg is ultimately defeated by the power of a mother's love he'll never be able to get back. This causes his eventual retreat, with a vow to return once again. Like Geeg, I shall return once again as well. That's it for dark aspects of EarthBound Beginnings. But there's still 2 whole games in the franchise to cover. I do have a few unrelated projects uploading before then, but join me in the next Dark Aspects episode for a remake of my first video on the SNES Super Famicom Classic. Then once again for the finale, focusing on Mother 3. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you when Geeg, or Geegus, strikes back. It's been a little while, everyone, but welcome to episode 21 of Dark Aspects, a series where I talk about the adult content hidden within family-friendly video games. This multi-part remake of my earliest video on the channel will talk about everything scary, shocking, and suggestive in the English localization of EarthBound, looking at all the censorship and changes made to the game from its original Japanese release, known as Mother 2. With strict content policies and ratings board guidelines to follow, how far was Nintendo of America willing to go in preserving this game's mature themes, and creator Shigesato Itoi's original script? Let's talk about how even after a great deal of revisions, this game we got in the West is considered to be one of the darkest Nintendo's ever produced. A couple of ground rules, I guess, before we start. To make comparing the games less confusing, I won't be using the titles EarthBound and Mother 2 interchangeably. So when I say EarthBound, I'm referring specifically to the English release of the game. When I say Mother 2, then, I'm talking about the original Japanese version. Also, much like the name change from Geeg to Geegus between the first and second game, Pokey is how Porky's name was localized into English. They are absolutely the same character, but I will use Pokey when referring to EarthBound, and Porky in the context of its sequel. With all that out of the way, let's begin. Part 1. Violence and Villainy. The first topic of today is EarthBound's exploration of dysfunctional families. It's no secret that Pokey, the second hand to Geegus and the primary antagonist of the sequel, lived in an abusive household. In Mother 2, Pokey's father punishes him and his brother off-screen for coming home late, which plays a violent sound effect revealed after to have been spankings, when Pokey complains about his butt hurting. In EarthBound, that sound was edited to seem less harsh. Instead of physical correction, it emulates yelling. This is affirmed when Pokey whines instead about his father telling him he can't have dessert for the rest of the decade. That's not the only time EarthBound censors abuse, though. Later on in the game, Tony warns Jeff that if he gets caught sneaking out of Winter's Snowwood boarding school, he'll be punished big time. This was changed from Mother 2's line, where he instead warns that if you get caught, you'll get a paddling. So after getting smacked or yelled at, depending on the version, Pokey's mother, Lardna, complains her husband is much too lenient with the children, wishing he'd punish the kids more. In Mother 2, Lardna continues to insult her son until the very end of the game, calling him a pig of a son when he goes missing. His father even verbally abuses him, spending his time drinking at the bar without his wife knowing, and instead of looking for his son. Their family fractures even further when Lardna starts seeing a new man. In Mother 2, his name can figuratively mean lover boy or stud, so in EarthBound he's known as Mr. Pretty Man. And according to the Japanese script, his parents are still married at this point. Lardna is cheating on her husband, and her husband is off getting wasted. It is worth mentioning that any instance of alcohol in Mother 2 was either removed, like these human enemies grumbling about today's youth instead of blathering drunkenly, or replaced with coffee and coffee-related beverages like espressos in an attempt to lessen EarthBound's age rating. But it's in name only, as anyone with a caffeine buzz is holding what still clearly looks like a mug of beer, complete with flushed faces and dialogue interrupting hiccups. Compared to Pokey's home life, Ness's is much tamer, though it's far from ideal. His mom is great, but from what we're shown, she's raising Ness and his sister all on her own. While Ness's dad sends money his way, a lot of money, he's simply not there. It's an ongoing joke in the fandom that Ness's dad is a phone, because like Nintendo's father, the only way to communicate with him is by calling. Though in EarthBound Beginnings, he at least makes an appearance after the credits. As we'll see another example of in a bit and all throughout my Dark Aspects videos, neglectful or absent fathers is a common theme throughout the Mother series. Moving south of Winters but not shifting gears yet, we're introduced to Jeff's father, Dr. Andonuts. He's a very aloof parent, to say the least. He hasn't seen Jeff in about 10 years, and when they first meet here, he seems to have forgotten all about him. It's made very obvious that he puts his work as a scientist above his responsibilities as a father. And towards the end of the game, when Ness is asked to activate the phase distorter required to confront Gigas, the player can refuse, which will have Andonuts ask his son instead. When Jeff says no, his father will be disappointed that he's lost his nerve. In Mother 2 though, he'll outright call Jeff a wuss instead. Keep in mind, this is immediately following a major display of braveness, when the party has their brain programs surgically transferred to the shells of robots, because their bodies would have been destroyed in the process of time travel. I am getting ahead of myself though, so going back in time ourselves from this point, I'd like to speak about the early game again with the Onett police force. After Ness trespasses to confront the first Your Sanctuary boss, and requests access to the next town over, Captain Strong orders his team to face off against the boy. These cops aren't implied to have been brainwashed, they just want to fight a kid. They also love to complain and are useless in general. Ness is the only one to take care of the local gang problem while they simply block off roads. I'm not going to say too much more about this, but corrupt cops are unfortunately entirely relevant in our world today, as they clearly are in Eagle Land. While speaking about the abuse of power, the boss of Berglund Park, Everdred, informs Ness that Paula, the second party member and girl he's been looking for, has been kidnapped by crazed cultists as a planned sacrifice. But why does this crime lord care so much about one girl's safe return? In Mother 2, it's made much more obvious that he's actually tied to the crime, revealing that he lent out the cabin Paula's being held at to the kidnappers. When she is eventually saved by Ness, Everdred will be relieved, giving the two of them a $10,000 wad of cash. In EarthBound, it isn't clearly explained why he gives them 10 grand, but it makes much more sense in Mother 2, because the stack of bills is implied to have been the money he was paid for renting out the cabin in the first place. So this was likely done out of remorse. He gifted them the money to clear his conscience. As for the cultists themselves practicing happyism, their outfits were modified because the localizers were concerned they looked too similar to the Ku Klux Klan's robes and hoods. Further concerning as well were the H's featured on their foreheads that could be mistaken as K's due to the small sprite size. While on the topic, it was confirmed by head localizer Marcus Lindblom that Threek was changed to Threed because again there was fear that the name could be misconstrued as 3K, unintentionally alluding to the acronym KKK. If the attempt of sacrificing a little girl wasn't enough, let's continue this theme of violence with the game's combat. One of the funny things about EarthBound is that back in 1995 when it first released, reviewers were hounding the game for how utterly non-violent it was. But in battle, while these are static sprites and everything happening is explained through text, Ness is still made to bash animals and people, turned hostile by Gigas' influence with a baseball bat. Nothing is killed, mind you, they are either tamed or reverted back to normal, but imagining these fights playing out in real time is certainly no romp in a McDonald's playland. One part of the game that still relies on imagination but more directly depicts a brutal exchange is that of Prince Pooh, the fourth and final party member's Moo training, inspired by the Chinese tale of a prodigal young man and the hermit. Meditating upon a high cliff and ignoring all worldly distractions will activate a sequence in which the spirit of Pooh's ancient lineage appears as an apparition. It'll ask to tear off the boy's limbs, starting with his arms and legs so they can be fed to the crows. The player must answer yes for each, taking away Pooh's total health with each body part that's removed. To make this scene even more immersive and disturbing, when the spirit rips off Pooh's ears, the audio cuts out completely. The music and selection sound effects gone. His eyes are taken next, which causes the screen to fade to black. The only thing that's left then is his mind, but even that's surrendered as a final test. While this training seems terrifying, it is all illusionary, and it is not senseless mind torture. Perhaps it's for absolute clarity, to prove his devotion, to focus on his goal with zero distractions. Maybe it's preparation, the need to persist through pain for his long journey to come. Whatever the case may be, it's a great introduction to his unbreakable character. My other favorite segment of the game, which, big surprise, also happens to be dark, comes from the sprawling city of Fourside. Along with the children, a certain recurring artifact arrives in this grandiose place. The evil Mani statue, or as it's called in Japan, the Mani Devil. It's implied to be endued with some of Gigas' power, harboring a hypnotizing allure that causes those susceptible, such as Mr. Carpainter, to become malevolent and act out in strange ways, like establishing the happiest cult. This statue is passed along throughout the adventure, its strong influence guiding many of the situations Ness and company must resolve, one of which being the entrapment of Ness and Jeff in a seemingly alternate dimension, a warped reality known as Moonside. It's essentially a brain-melting, mirrored version of Fourside, forever in the veil of night, made up of these flashing neon colors. The music is dissonant and twisted. Its inhabitants speak in incoherent, disconcerting sentences. It's an unsettling place to escape from, which is only possible by destroying the source. When the devil statue is dispatched, it's revealed that Moonside was a hallucination, all of its events taking place in the storage room of Boris's bar, or Jackie's cafe. The Mani Devil isn't the only allusion to demons in this game, but I will be continuing the discussion in the next episode on dark aspects of EarthBound. We'll go over the many ways death and dying have been censored for the English release, along with a look at the more suggestive themes, all leading to the final confrontation with Gigas. Welcome all to the next episode in my Dark Aspects of Mother series, and the second video comparing the English localization of EarthBound to its original Japanese release, Mother 2. If you haven't seen the previous episode yet, diving into the game's depictions of violence, I recommend watching that first. For everyone else though, make sure to grab a Hawkeye from the Scaraba Pyramid gift shop so we can delve a little deeper into the darkness. Part 2, Death and Demons. It's now time to get a little more macabre, as today I'm going to be exploring all references to dying, death, and demons in the world of Mother 2, and explain how much of that was retained in the English release. Early on in the game, we're introduced to Buzz, the bee that's not a bee, sent from the future to warn Ness of a timeline in which Gigas succeeds in plunging all into the darkness of hell, rephrased as eternal darkness for EarthBound. Despite his appearance, the flying insect is actually very adept in Psi, protecting the party from this Starman Jr., a hired assassin sent by Gigas. But while Buzz survives this attempt on his life, imminent demise is inevitable when Pokey's mom, Lardna, mistakes him for a toilet fly or a dung beetle. "Die and go to hell," she screams in Mother 2 as she smashes his guts out. In EarthBound, any reference to his dying is replaced with euphemisms like passing on, but nevertheless he leaves this world, existing now as just another memory in Ness's mind. Which is a place in the game we're actually able to visit. Buzz's tombstone can be spotted later in Magicant, a realm created inside Ness's head that he's able to access after standing in each of the 8 power spots of the Earth. Everything we see here is a reflection of Ness's own past memories and self, which is why it looks so different to the Magicant explored in Mother 1. According to series creator Shigesato Itoi, everyone has their own Magicant. Ness's just happens to be especially scary. Itoi then admits that perhaps that's what it's like inside his own head. Quote, "I mean, I'm a pretty cheerful guy myself on the outside, but who knows what I'm like on the inside." Unquote. So just how messed up is Ness's Magicant exactly? Honestly, not very. At least when compared to the likes of the Place of Emptiness, Mu, Moonside, and even Threed, which we'll get to in a bit. But there are some unsettling occurrences to find here. In general, the dramatic shifts in color are very surreal, with an overall geometry consisting of abstract shapes and objects. There's talking snowmen who have long since melted away in reality, but thrive in Ness's subconscious. We can also speak with a younger version of Ness we no longer have time to play with, secondary antagonist Pokey in a more vulnerable state of mind, and a handful of defeated enemies, expressing the pain they still feel from Ness wounding them, likely representing a sort of repressed guilt. Things start to get more dangerous when venturing deeper into Ness's headspace, but thankfully assistance is available in the form of these flying men. These bird-like creatures representing our protagonist's courage, returning from Mother 1. They are optional but can be recruited at any time to fight alongside Ness in battle, with the morally grey catch that once they perish in combat, they can't be revived. There are 5 flying men in total, all optimistic and eager in aiding Ness on his quest, at first. When their numbers start dwindling, the flying men will warn Ness, and by extension the player, to be more careful, telling him not to treat their kind like trash. When there's just one remaining, he'll scold Ness, telling him that what he's doing isn't courageous, it's desperation. The first 2 gravestones properly honor the felled flying men buried there, but the last 3 feature lazier and lazier inscriptions, to the point where the final tombstone simply reads, Tombstone. It's a different approach to the remorse Nintendo so clearly felt for all who were lost in EarthBound Beginnings. But this is effective in another way. It's sad to imagine Ness having an increasingly difficult time remembering the flying men individually, and the importance of their sacrifice as they die out one by one. Buzz and the flying men, then, are the only cases in which a character indisputably dies on screen. Any other instance is merely implied. Such is the case with Everdred, the crime boss I mentioned in the last video, who also has a place in Ness's memory. Well before his final appearance, but after he sends the kids off with a stack of cash as repentance, he's seen keeled over in a back alley of Fourside, surrounded by a crowd of concerned civilians. They all comment on him as if he's about to die, which seems to be confirmed when he recites what's known in Japanese culture as a death poem. Everyone is mortified then, stepping aside in shock when he simply gets up and walks away following his speech. Fun fact, this sequence actually left the biggest impression on Nintendo legend Shigeru Miyamoto when he played through Mother 2. He claimed in an interview that the NPC reactions in this scene felt very natural, and he praised the game's obvious expressiveness. It's hinted that Everdred staggered away to die off-screen, but in both versions it's left vague as to whether or not he actually did. There's a couple of townsfolk in Tucson that will gossip about what happened to him, but their dialogue doesn't exactly clear things up. In Mother 2, one of the two colorfully reassures us that even if he is dead, he'll always be watching over us from hell. Everdred does have an unused ghost sprite found within the game's data, so if you aren't convinced he was a planned 5th party member at one point, this sprite could support those in favor of his grim fate. Staying in Fourside but shuffling over to the Monotoli building, we learn that the sneaky and selfish Pokey actually selflessly gave a gift to his maid, Electra, and that's selflessly with an asterisk, as unsurprisingly, this exchange wasn't entirely innocent. In Mother 2, she explains that when Pokey handed it over, he said, Meido no Miyage, which, according to Clyde Mandelin's Legends of Localization book, can potentially mean a gift for a maid, but is also an old phrase, meaning something like, this will be a good memory for when you die and go to hell. Electra recognizes this double interpretation and shrugs it off as a joke, mixing Japanese proverbs with English. It's a dark joke for sure, that was unfortunately but understandably lost in EarthBound's localization, as was any mention of hell, if you couldn't already tell. Slumping over to the department store with Jeff's soul in tow, one of Gigis's lackeys suddenly abducts Paula and seizes control of the building. In Mother 2, this alien tells the boys to die and go to hell. No, go to heaven. Even though this same line in EarthBound was censored to remove the mention, I personally prefer the phrasing, you will be gone and you'll be burning in, well, you'll go to heaven. That makes it a bit more obvious to me that this creature realizes its enemies are the good guys midway through the conversation. One example of this type of censorship not working, however, is a happiest cultist that tells Ness there's no salvation for non-believers, go to hell. In EarthBound, like Eternal Darkness but less cool, the cultist's threat was replaced with to eternity with you. There is a separate cultist who tells Ness, don't go to heaven, as a roundabout way of saying go to hell, but this interestingly is not a case of censorship. The line is exactly the same between both versions. Taking a Greyhound bus back to Onett, the town's hospital is named Yabu in Mother 2, which is the Japanese word for bush, but is also slang for quack doctor, implying that all the staff inside are frauds. The name was translated literally in EarthBound, so the initial joke was lost. But this is a prime example of why I love the writing of the Mother series. A particular name or line of dialogue may seem nonsensical, but Itoi is known to be careful with his words, so it likely has some sort of greater purpose. That joke is innocent on its own, but things get morbid, with one sign inside reading, Tombstone Blowout Sale. We have a special discount for those who have passed on in this hospital. What would you like written on your tombstone? Onet Hospital Surgery Team. The line was very similar in Mother 2, but has actually been revised in every Japanese re-release of the game. Clyde, or Mado, suggests that this text was either a problem for Japan's new rating board, the Computer Entertainment Rating Organization, SARO, at the time of the Mother 1+2 port, or that Itoi himself thought the humor was in poor taste. In the last video, I mentioned Mother 2's Many Many Devil boss becoming the evil Many Many for EarthBound, but there are a few other instances of the word devil in the script being changed because the localization team was made to remove them. In Mother 2, Forsyth's mayor, Monotoli, suddenly rose to power by deliberately making a deal with the devil. In EarthBound, he instead supposedly made an exchange with a pure evil entity. Strangely enough, in the case of enemy names, demon seems to be a suitable replacement for devil. The Hermit Devil, for example, became the Squatter Demon, while the Devil Rafflesia was changed to Demonic Petunia. Then there's Devil Kiss, and its stronger variant, Deep Devil Kiss, changed into Kiss of Death and French Kiss of Death respectively. I think the localization choice was really clever, but isn't it at least a little suggestive to have a big pair of lips with this naming scheme? One apparent exception to this accepted use of demon, though, is the Magicant boss Ness's Demon, having been changed to Ness's Nightmare. This censorship is all the more surprising when considering one glaring mention of devil that remained untouched in English, the all-important Devil Machine containing Gigas himself. We're getting ahead of ourselves though, so backtracking to the not quite as scary Threed, acting as an equivalent to the original Mother's town of Halloween, we have a literal ghost town filled with ghouls, ghasts, and goons alike. There's zombies called zombies, and ghosts called zombies for some reason, featuring horrifying artwork from the official manuals. The color palette of this haunted circus town incorporates dark purples and greens paired with vivid shades of pinks and reds. Like Happy Happy Village, it works to paint a grim atmosphere, escalated when Ness and Paula find themselves captured, knocked unconscious, and imprisoned beneath the graveyard. How did they find themselves in this predicament? Well, after having their souls stared into by a pair of zombies, a scantily clad woman being ogled by a local can be found loitering outside Threed's hotel. When followed inside, the music becomes distorted, and this apparent lady of the night leads the kids into an upstairs bedroom where they're ambushed by these creatures of the night. It's an odd and slightly provocative sequence, but it serves as the perfect segue into dark aspects of EarthBound's finale, where I'll look at the more sensual themes this game snuck in, before confronting the violent, fearful, and sexual inspiration behind Gigas as one of the darkest villains from Nintendo's history. This is the third and final part in my analysis for dark aspects of EarthBound. Each episode so far has centered on a different way the game explores mature themes: violence and villainy, death and demons. Now, I'm going to briefly discuss a few examples of sexual themes before wrapping up this series with the amalgamation of all three topics: the evocative, evil, and erotic inspiration behind Gigas. Part 3. Suggestive and sensual. When it comes to overall differences between the English localization of EarthBound and the original Japanese version, Mother 2, the most well-known change is that of Ness when he's exploring Magicant. In Western releases, he wears pajamas, but in Mother 2, he's completely nude. Why the cover-up censorship? Well, it can very simply be chalked up to cultural differences. This isn't very shocking in Japan, where nudity is accepted in family-friendly media, as it's commonly used to portray and is associated with purity. As Magicant is a personal journey, a world created inside Ness's mind he must conquer to unlock his greatest potential, it makes sense he's fully exposed both figuratively and literally. With that said, in Mother 2, his nakedness is still used once for comedic effect. One of the female NPCs calls him a pervert, a line which was of course changed for EarthBound, since his sprite's been changed from a birthday suit to jammies. Funnily enough, the official EarthBound strategy guide that was initially packaged with the game still has him talking to his family au naturel, suggesting this pajama censorship happened further along in development. On the topic of nudity but putting our backpack back on, let's head outside of our head and over to Tucson. At the end of EarthBound, Ness can visit the mother of Venus, that famous singer who performed in Forsyth for some very overenthused fans. Her mom will explain that a book of photographs featuring her daughter is coming out soon, so she hopes Venus will keep her clothes on for it. In Mother 2, however, it's not just a worry. Her mom explicitly states that apparently they're going to publish a photo book of her, in the nude. That's hard to top, Allah, but one of my favorite adult jokes in the game is an easily missable line, given by the Hint Man when visiting Summers for the first time. He'll point Ness and company in the right direction by telling them, quote, "Try placing a call to the strip. Oops, sorry, I mean the Stoic Club," unquote. This blatant reference to strip clubs left in both EarthBound Beginnings and EarthBound was always really surprising to me. This line is essentially the same in Japanese, but it was revised in re-releases where the word isn't quite finished though still implied. What's really funny though is that instead of oops, he stops himself with another linguistic filler, So now he doesn't outright say strip, but this verbal trickery sounds really close to stripper, so it was a great way to save the joke without removing it. You'd be surprised at how many more risque references can be found in the game's script. There's so many they could honestly fill out the rest of this video, but I'm going to stop there as I think I got the point across and there's still a lot to cover with Gigas. So if you are interested in the rest of the crude and lewd humor this game slips past the radar, I will be reserving it all for a separate video as a sort of dark aspect spin-off. So please look out for that in the future. But for now, in the present, the past calls. So let's not keep Gigas waiting. Part 4. Evocative, Evil, and Erotic. Gigas. With everything I've looked at so far, it's obvious the game has pushed boundaries in many different ways, thoroughly tackling these adult topics and more. EarthBound is a mature game that appears innocuous. It manages to be accessible to anyone of any age while harboring many complex and intense undertones. Gigas is the embodiment of evil, but also of that sentiment. He's a fearful final encounter as is, made even more disturbing when factoring in the deeper connotations. Throughout EarthBound, Gigas is mentioned by name only. His evil influence, helped spread by means of the Mani Mani statue, is what causes the animals and people of the game world to become hostile. He attacks indirectly from an unspecified time in the past, which is where the Chosen Four must now go. However, like I mentioned in the first video, the kids must have their brain programs, or spirits, transferred into the shells of robots, so that their bodies won't be demolished in the process of time travel. Threed was a pretty unique location in that during the zombie invasion, the party could not leave until the threat was resolved. It's the same case here, but on another level, because once the phase distorter is entered, it's truly a point of no return. In other words, Ness and company cannot go back to the present unless Gigas is defeated, and even then, it's not guaranteed. The entire scene is chilling, with even Dr. Andonut struggling to relay this information. But things become truly bleak when first stepping out into the cave of the past. Shuffling around as mechanical husks through desolate caverns, to the sound of a foreboding background track at arms with the strongest enemies of the game is a perfectly haunting build-up to Gigas' lair. Everything seems so cold and lifeless here, which makes it all the more surprising when the palette of grays is suddenly overwhelmed with these fleshy colors. as the party walks across what seems like organic, pulsating tubes. They all lead to the Devil's Machine, an indeterminate instrument housing Gigas in his now unruly state of being. According to Pokey, Gigas can no longer think rationally, and he isn't even aware of what he's doing anymore. It seems that along with Gigas' mind, his body has destroyed itself too, distorting immensely from his original appearance in EarthBound Beginnings into this. It's when the Devil's Machine, interestingly displaying the face of Ness, or perhaps Ninten, is turned off that all hell breaks loose. Gigas' incomprehensible form encompasses the entirety of the screen. It terrifies even Pokey, describing what he's unleashed as a bizarre dimension. During the fight, Gigas will begin spouting what seems like nonsense. He'll repeat Ness's name again and again and again. "I feel good," he'll say immediately after telling you about how sad he is. It's contradictory, it's frenetic, and like Itoi when he wrote these lines, they never fail to genuinely send a chill down my spine. But is it really all just unintelligible? Gigas' mind did derail, but is there a greater meaning behind what he's saying? Yes, absolutely, and thankfully, while there has been a lot of misinformation on the topic spreading across the internet in the past, Itoi's inspiration and intention for Gigas is well documented. It's a pretty well-known story in the fandom, but once when Itoi was a child, he accidentally walked into the wrong showing of a movie theater. He happened to witness a scene from the end of Kenpei to Barabara Shibijin, translating into something like the military policeman and the dismembered beauty, where a woman is strangled to death by her fiancé while making love to him. In the words of Itoi, this combination of atrocity and eroticism side by side greatly disturbed him. He was so distraught he hardly spoke for the rest of that night. It even worried his parents. So when writing the lines for this harrowing final encounter, Itoi pulled from that personal trauma, because he wanted players to experience that same twisted, confusing mix of pleasure and pain he was exposed to at a young age. That was always the incident to explain where the concept of Gigas came from, but it actually is not the only one. According to Mato's Legends of Localization book on EarthBound, Itoi recalls witnessing a traffic accident firsthand a long time ago. He saw a young woman lying on the ground, but instead of saying, "I can't breathe" or "help," she just cried out, "It hurts." While none of Gigas' spoken lines are direct quotes from the film that traumatized him, Itoi did take "it hurts" from this memory. Adding to the overall distress, he wanted players to feel reluctance in attacking Gigas, even though he's the enemy. Itoi goes on to explain that the line, "It's not right, not right, not right," means what you're doing isn't right and what I'm doing isn't right. To make something truly upsetting, Itoi had to dig, like an average strength mole, into the darkest depths of his mind. It's clear a lot of thought was put into what Gigas says and how he says it, confirmed doubly by the intimate writing process that ensured these intense emotions hit their mark. What do I mean? Well, at the time Mother 2's script was written, Itoi didn't know how to use computers, so he'd state all the text he wanted typed out loud. For Gigas' dialogue, with just him and his typist in the room, Itoi would speak one character at a time, even every ... A slow process for sure, but having an extra pair of hands meant Itoi could focus entirely on thinking, and it allowed him to gauge his coworkers' reaction to what was just typed out. If there was an effective piece of dialogue, the typist's expression would clearly change. So Itoi knew he had a really good line when they would turn to him and say, "Mr. Itoi," while on the verge of tears. That type of dedication is what makes EarthBound stand out, and created a finale unlike anything else you can experience in gaming. It shouldn't be too much of a surprise to learn then, especially when considering the previous game, that the method to defeating Gigas once and for all is unconventional and innovative. After Pokey's final threat, it seems appropriate for the player to continue launching their most powerful attacks. But after exhausting all psi, bottle rockets, bazookas, and bombs, it starts to become hopeless when all that's left is hand to cosmic horror combat. It is in this very moment of desperation that Itoi wanted players to realize they've grown stronger than what's displayed on their status screen. Money, experience points, weapons, it's all irrelevant now. Because the only way to escape this nightmare is by praying. That low-key, random effect in battle ability you probably used once and forgot about. Praying during this fight allows Paula's pleas for help to be heard, subconsciously motivating characters we've met throughout the journey to pray for the children's safety too. As more and more prayers are cast, Gigas is weakened, but things seem dismal when eventually Paula's call is absorbed by the darkness. At this point, it's very likely the player, the person holding the controller, is also praying so that they'll win, which is what ultimately deals the final blow. Because the game's been storing your real name back when it broke the fourth wall by asking for this very purpose. It's you who will be credited for dissolving Gigas into static until he dissipates into nothingness. As this is happening, Pokey, rather unfazed, mentions sneaking off into another era to think about his next plan. The game ends then with Pokey sending a letter to Ness, challenging the hero to come and find him, but nobody seems to know where it is he's gone off to. It's a cliffhanger that was left unresolved for a little over a decade, which is coincidentally when Pokey's punishment in EarthBound is supposed to be over. Not that he deserves any kind of dessert for his abysmal actions in the next game, which we'll get to. But with that, I want to end things here by saying I have a lot to thank for EarthBound. Gigas and the crazy conspiracy theories surrounding him inspired me to create and upload my first ever analytical video on April 10th, 2014. It started performing better than anything I had ever put out on YouTube. So about a year later, in March of 2015, I decided to really pursue this, and I've been uploading content regularly ever since. Like every Nintendo kid, I knew about Ness and Lucas from Super Smash Bros., but seeing Gigas at the top of every most disturbing boss battles list on the internet was the real reason I finally decided to give the game a try. EarthBound is so much more than its dark aspects, but it is because of those dark aspects that I found my niche here. You don't have to worry about it taking 10 years for me to make dark aspects of Mother 3, but I will say it is going to be a big project. I'm seriously expecting it to be split into 4 parts. Until then, thank you all for watching. To be continued. Welcome to Dark Aspects, an ongoing analytical series, shining light on the more mature moments of my favorite Nintendo games. This time, I have an episode that's very special for a number of reasons. It's Mother 3, the game that gave Dark Aspects its name. Perhaps more importantly though, is the fact that at the very least, it'd be a nominee for the category of darkest, non-mature rated game Nintendo has ever published. When compared to its own series, and to use a metaphor, if Mother 1 and Mother 2 are both rickety bridges providing somewhat safe passage across a dark undercurrent, then Mother 3 is a sinking boat you'll have to take instead. So however you choose to cross, you're going to get wet. From the river of course, but mostly from your own tears. Series creator Shigesato Itoi summed up this dichotomy best when he said his games all work at different ages. You can play Mother when you're young. Mother 2 is better when you know a bit more about the world. And then Mother 3 is best played when you're older. Heavy themes like death and human cruelty aren't just implied this time around after all. They're a major part of the core story, told through many diverse characters spread across 8 chapters. This game is a different beast than its predecessors, and because of the sheer volume of topics to discuss, I wasn't sure where to start, but I realized I could easily take a page from the book of Mother 3 and go through the game chronologically. one chapter at a time. And that's exactly what I'll be doing today. This is Dark Aspects of Mother 3, Chapter 1, Night of the Funeral. Let's begin with one of the very first things the player sees, the title screen. Mother 3's logo is a combination of metal and wood Mr. Itoi describes as mentally unsettling. In an interview with Nintendo Dream, he elaborated by explaining that when things that don't match at all are attached to one another, like a hearse, which has a casket of both metal and wood, it makes you feel a little weird thinking about how they connect. But forcibly coordinating incompatible things, like a wooden table placed in a reinforced concrete building, is just a part of modern living. Feeling this discomfort, while understanding that it makes up this world we all live in, is represented in the logo as the first major theme Mother 3 presents. This concept is further explored in-game by the many enemies you'll encounter throughout the journey. Most of them were once innocent creatures Frankensteined into hostile chimeras as multi-animal and/or machine hybrids. Itoi states that Porky, the antagonist responsible for this madness, is also a symbol of humankind, so he wanted to incorporate these horribly unpleasant things into the logo. Okay, how long are we into the video? We can hit the start button now. All of the Mother games allow you to name the main characters, but this time, you'll get to name the protagonist's family members too. Be warned though, if you choose to name any or all of them after your own family, you'll be in for a real shock, as the first character subject to tragedy is Lucas. Both his mother Hinawa and his twin brother Klaus die in front of him at separate points in the story at the hands of the aforementioned antagonist, along with his army of pig-mask soldiers. Hinawa is savagely murdered by one of their chimera experiments, and Klaus sort of becomes one. We'll get to that, believe me, but for now, just know that for most of the game, Lucas's brother is presumed dead, slain by the same monster that killed their mother. Itoi believes there's a depth in attaching a name to something, explaining how it can be a big deal giving your characters names of their own. After all, it's hard to feel a deep emotion behind the words, "What's wrong, Pee-Pee?" When Itoi first heard about the impressions people got from Hinawa's death, what really stood out to him were the players who had named her after their own mothers, and then mentioned how much they appreciate their moms afterward. Female players who named Hinawa after themselves were in for a surprise, especially if they had children of their own. Some of these players reportedly accepted the character's passing with a feeling of warmth. People who are living their own lives to the fullest, says Itoi. My personal experience? Well, I can certainly relate. In my first playthrough, I kept most of the default names, except for Lucas and Klaus. I named the twins after myself and my brother respectively. We aren't twins, and we're definitely different in plenty of ways, but we are two sides of the same coin. We grew up in the same environment, and host similar mental afflictions as adults, so I feel that we can help and understand each other completely. I've always loved the option of naming game characters after yourself and the people you know, because it's a kind of immersion that allows you to really step into the shoes of these characters. I think that's so important. I truly believe that reading my name in place of Lucas's during these moments helps me establish an unforgettable connection to his character. The don't care option is always available to you if his story hits a little too close to home. But whatever the case, you'll find yourself with a newfound reverence for this timid kid, especially if you were introduced to Lucas through Super Smash Bros. Brawl and then played Mother 3. That's what happened to me. Believe it or not, Lucas was one of my least played characters when Brawl was the newest entry in that series. But as soon as I finished Lucas's game, I thought I owed it to him to go back through the subspace emissary and beat up Porky to pay my respects. He's been my main fighter ever since. Getting back to Hinawa, her death doesn't take place at the end of the story. It happens about an hour into this first chapter, just enough time to introduce her as a caring mother and an invaluable friend to the citizens of Tazmily Village. She also loves her husband Flint very much, and is last shown sending a letter out to him before making the trek from her father's place beyond the forest with the kids in tow. It's supposed to be a safe walk, but that all changes when pig-like soldiers suddenly set it ablaze overnight. Mass panic ensues back in town, and Flint is recruited for a rescue mission to brave the brush fire and save a family whose home is nestled deep in the woods. Explosives may have started this firestorm, but the pigmasks are keeping it burning with the first of the chimeras Flint has to face. Literal fireflies as the supposed fusion of a small bug and a cheap lighter. Inside the combusted house is yet another changed critter, a flying mouse with its arms disturbingly swapped out for wings. Upon escaping the wreckage, a now soot-covered duo meets back up with young Fuel's injured father when it miraculously starts to rain, snuffing out the inferno. That's one crisis resolved, but there's still a feeling of apprehension hanging in the air, as Flint's own wife and kids haven't returned yet. Isaac is the first to suggest the worst, mentioning how he thought he could hear screams coming from the mountains. This stomach-churning sentence implies that Isaac heard Hinawa's death throes. The entire town soon gets involved, and after more bad omens, along with another run-in with the pigmasks, revealing their heinous plans to reconstruct all of Tazmily's wildlife, Lucas and Klaus are found by the riverside, though it's just the two of them. The revelation that Hinawa was killed is delivered by Tazmily's ironworker, Bronson, in a way that many players deem heartless. But there is a reason for his tactless wording, as there's something different about Tazmily and its residents. Just know that for reasons we'll eventually get to, these people have never known anguish or trauma. Tazmily of the Nowhere Islands is supposed to be a utopia, so Bronson's being entirely literal when he admits he's not sure what to say. None of the villagers have experienced anything like this before, so their innate lack of empathy causes a rift that only grows deeper when they start to judge Flint and Lucas's continued grieving later on. Nevertheless, in this moment, Bronson is clearly hesitant and worked up about how to drop the delicate news, eventually landing on this. I have good news, and I have bad news. Which do you want to hear first? No. Let me start with the good news first. I picked up a giant Drago Fang. It'll make for a great weapon. I figured you could probably use it. As for the bad news, the bad news is, it's where I found the Drago Fang. It was it was pierced through your wife's heart. That final line is so raw, it gives me chills every time I read it. Flint's reaction is less than calm as he grabs a log from the still burning flames and starts swinging in a vengeful frenzy. He attacks any of his peers that come close, felling a few of them until he's knocked out from a blow to the back of the head. Flint is thrown into Tazmily's prison as the first among their people to ever be incarcerated. His eldest son is the first to visit, vowing to get stronger so that he can avenge Hinawa. But behind bars, Flint is powerless to stop him. Lucas tries to go with his brother, but he insists on acting alone, so Lucas, likely feeling too helpless to interfere, must similarly watch Klaus leave his side. Klaus isn't totally alone though. For better or worse, probably worse, he is assisted along the way by a group of magical human-esque entities known as Magypsies. Perhaps recognizing the psychokinetic potential within the boy, they teach him a powerful psi technique instead of stopping his reckless abandon. Some of the Magypsies in their ensemble are entirely apathetic towards humans, at least at first, showing little concern in the fact that they essentially sent the child to his death. Magypsies live thousands of years, so why should they, or anyone, worry about the comparatively fleeting life of a human? Aeolia thinks that having taught him the Psy move was an act of goodwill, and while it may have given the boy a fighting chance, the ability was supposed to have been difficult for him to handle, an unmanageable power that likely worked only to strengthen his resolve. Eventually, Flint and his father-in-law get their retribution by scaling the Drago Plateau and taming the mechanized beast. Upon his victory, Flint rebrandishes the weaponized Dragofang that took his wife's life to prepare a final blow. But before that happens, Alec talks him down when the cyborg's baby enters the fray. Flint lowers his weapon and approaches the mother, but is knocked back, and the lot of them halt to watch a teardrop fall from the Mecha Drago as its labored breathing ceases. Even after being spared, the once friendly creature in all probability dies here. Within the game's data, there exists an unused animation of Flint stabbing with his spear. Now, this could have easily just been meant for an earlier version of the cutscene preceding the boss. Imagine Flint piercing the Drago's hide automatically instead of requiring the player to select it in battle. But it's cool to think of some other possibilities, even if it is purely speculation. So what if the player was given a choice after the monster's defeat? To show mercy or give in to the ultimate revenge? And what if the game tracked all of the player's critical moral decisions throughout the story, affecting its outcome? I thought of these questions because there's plenty of seemingly related cut content. According to the cutting room floor, there exists an unused battle option called Consider. As of now, it seems that its data has been removed, and nothing happens when using the command, so it's anyone's guess as to how it would have functioned. What if it was used to try and make peace with the enemy? Paired with the mysterious kindness stat that is technically present in the final game but left unmentioned and underutilized, I'm led to believe that at one point, player actions mattered a little more. As far as influencing the game's conclusion, additional unused graphics, specifically this text reading happy end, and an animation of what looks like the antagonist dying, could suggest that alternate endings were planned. Theories aside, Chapter 1 ends with the Mother Drago shutting its eyes as the camera pans away and up to reveal an unconscious Klaus, face down on the cliffs below. Flint doesn't see his son, who, like the Drago, is probably also dead, but he'll never give up the desperate search. This tale begins as a tragedy. We get to see an old man do a funny dance in the next chapter, though. When it comes to dark aspects, this game's second chapter may just be the lightest. That's light as in the opposite of dark, but also light in terms of weight, because there isn't a ton here when compared to the other chapters. But even still, you can liken it to the mass of this big metal ball that's able to crush Duster for a non-standard game over. Welcome to Dark Aspects of Mother 3, Chapter 2, Thief Adventure. The story last left off on a solemn note, with the dramatic irony of Flint so close to finding his missing son Klaus, but never discovering the body. We, the audience, are shown that the boy was likely killed from the same reconstructed creature that murdered his mom, but the unfounded hope that Klaus might still be alive carries Flint into an obsessive, inexorable search. As the cowboy shepherd's preoccupied with his mission, the role of protagonist now shifts over to Duster, an ally who helped Flint take down another one of the Pigmask Army's Chimera experiments. Duster lives as a thief of justice, under the strict discipline of his father and mentor Wes. What are thieves of justice exactly? Well, you can think of them as vigilantes, trained in the art of stealth to protect Tazmily Village in lieu of an official police force. However, despite the family being a force for good, their shadowy skill set and concealed nature has bestowed them a seedy reputation. Sure, they've never taken anything from their neighbors, but the fact that they so easily could is a reality some are uncomfortable with. This is important to remember for later, as it also means that in this idealistic, crimeless society, their protectors are ironically the perfect scapegoats for when a theft does occur. Nevertheless, Chapter 2 begins with Wes sending Duster on a mission to retrieve an inexplicable object, said to be disastrous if discovered by the enemy. Wes hid this imperative item somewhere in the neighboring Asohe Castle. To Wes's successor, what needs to be recovered and where it's hiding should be obvious. So when Duster brings back the wrong thing, his dad explodes with rage by shattering the pilfered pot and berating Duster, calling him a moron throughout the rest of the chapter. Wes is shown later on in the game to genuinely care for his son. And that's great, he loves Duster deep down. But the old fogey certainly does not show it in this chapter. And while I do believe Wes to be a good person, this outburst makes the revelation that he may have been responsible for Duster's leg handicap considerably less surprising. We never actually see or get complete confirmation on what happened, but if the player has Duster initially refuse this mission, Wes admits that he blames himself because he physically pushed Duster too hard as a young child with excessive training. And the understanding that his own father may have crippled him is implied to torment Duster psychologically, a likelihood that's revealed when he and his human companions mistakenly ingest psychedelic mushrooms that tear at the weaknesses and the scars of their hearts. Because of Chapter 7's non-linearity, the player may opt to leave Duster involuntarily hanging out in Saturn Valley during the trip to and trip on Thane Island. So if, and only if, Duster's a part of the group during this hallucinogenic sequence, an apparition of Wes appears to reiterate his confession directly to Duster. This is getting off topic, but if Duster is not present, the hallucination of Wes is actually replaced with a disturbing sequence involving Alec, Lucas's grandfather. He'll ask if you've seen his deceased daughter, aka Lucas's mother, and will then tell you to bring her here right away, before the screen darkens, as he turns to the camera, breaking the fourth wall just like he did in the prologue, to tell the player that he knows they've seen her. We'll explore more of that later in this series, but for now, Duster's solo mission and its resulting failure must be undertaken by following Sunset Cemetery's Undertaker, Nippolite. Inside of his shack is a secret passageway to Asohe Castle, but before Duster can use it, zombies suddenly attack, because of course they do, this is a mother game. Since these are fairly generic interpretations of zombies, which are very much accepted in children's pop culture as a fun kind of scary, except for maybe this dog zombie with its drooping eye and exposed innards, I normally wouldn't be commenting about them being enemies. But the zombie man and the zombie lady have something darkly familiar about them. Their appearance is reminiscent of Klaus and Hanawa respectively, the two characters who've just recently passed away. There's the red hair, the striped shirt, the red dress. I'm not suggesting that they're supposed to be these characters or anything, but I think this morbid resemblance could have been intentional for the surprise factor. And while Hanawa's murder may have been the first traumatic death the denizens of Tazmily have experienced, the concept isn't foreign to them. Sunset Cemetery is filled with plenty of headstones after all. Sure, they could have already been here when these people first arrived on the Nowhere Islands, but at least one other grave was made up for a woman who was acquainted with Duster in life, since she comments on how much he's grown when she first pops out of the ground. These underworld inhabitants are no match for our underhanded hero though, so after sending them back from whence they came, the castle and its prize beckons. Asohe Castle itself is an interesting place. It's a timepiece, a historical relic haunted by more members of the afterlife. It's home to possessed suits of armor, ghost paintings, and demonic doors, but not all are unfriendly. The sheet ghost's eyes that aren't bloodshot are welcoming, the most memorable being that of a wine-loving spirit, letting each sip pass through itself and onto the floor. In an official localization, Nintendo would probably change any mention of wine to juice, Though perhaps they'd poke fun at their own censorship policy, like they did recently with Paper Mario the Origami King's family-friendly glasses of fruit juice. There's not much more to talk about here with Duster alone. You do fight this Pazuzu Maestro to acquire the noble spittoon, but we all know how that goes. Not all of Wes's hope in Duster is lost though, as he seems to have swiped something unrelated that belongs to the castle's princess. Wanting to investigate and to make sure they retrieve the right artifact this time, the Master Thief tags along armed with an endless supply of Duster's dirty socks. However, with the veil of nighttime gone and the pig masks now pillaging the place, the plan has become even more perilous. Poor Nippolite's already been made an example of. He's left busted and blue while his precious garden was mercilessly trampled by a pork tank. Luckily, the psi-powered Princess Kumatora, or whatever you choose to name her, is found inside, introducing herself by offhandedly commenting about how she's planning to cut off her leg with a knife to escape the bear trap she's caught in. Wes is more than prepared to help the rough and tough princess escape without resorting to mutilation. So, upon freedom, and after explaining that her goal is the same as theirs, reaching the apparent all-important heirloom before the pig masks, Kumatora joins the party. Don't worry, just a little spit on that flesh wound and it'll be as good as new. The Egg of Light, also known as the Hummingbird Egg, perched at the top of the tower is the real treasure Wes was after. A vessel that's supposed to contain all of the world's secrets. But however this information may have protected Tazmily against the pigs doesn't matter, because in a panic to evade them, Kumatora sets off a trap door, and the lot of them fall to what could have been their collective doom, had they not been so capable in the face of danger. Unlike whoever's skulls these belonged to in the nest of a giant water snake. But after subduing the serpent likely responsible, a sudden current sweeps everyone away. Wes and the princess wind up okay, but Duster, along with the egg, is nowhere to be found. Therefore, Chapter 2 ends with yet another misfortune, made worse when the missing Duster is accused of robbing a civilian of something they newly cherish, which was gifted to him and then sneakily stolen back by a shifty peddler we'll come to know as Facade. True to his name, this seemingly unassuming man is planting the seeds of distrust and discontentment in the amenable minds of Tazmily's residents. These themes of malevolent manipulation and mistreatment are only multiplied from here. So if you thought Wes's verbal abuse and insinuated accidental physical abuse of Duster was bad, you'll be in for a shock, as Salsa the Monkey is literally shocked again and again and again. So I'll see you all, and probably PETA too, for the next dark aspects of Mother 3. Thanks for watching. Mother 3's Chapter 3, The Suspicious Peddler, plays very differently to the two chapters that came before it, and the rest that follow. Rather than stepping into the boots of a rowdy cowboy or slipping on the shoes of a thief protege, we ditch the footwear altogether and assume the role of Salsa, a helpless monkey following the orders of his abuser Facade. We as players technically control Salsa, but we're mostly being controlled by this detestable stranger. Facade electrocutes Salsa, who is bound by a shock collar, unabatedly and without hesitation. Not following a direct order, being too slow, going the wrong way, or attempting escape will all result in an electric jolt. Salsa is subconsciously zapped in his dreams, until he's literally zapped awake, and he can be punished in battle or for no reason at all. Because his abuse is inevitable in many situations, it can leave us feeling powerless as players, which is kind of the point. However, there are opportunities to prevent Facade from pushing that button, which is when our actions are able to make a difference. Whenever I'm given a branching choice in games with an obviously correct answer, I love to select the wrong one first because you'll likely get a funny reaction. But when I make Salsa purposely do the wrong dance, I can't help but feel a little bad, knowing I'm the reason he's being shocked this time. Granted, that didn't stop me from doing it, but it did get me thinking. This unorthodox relationship between Facade, Salsa, and the player is explored even further in battle. Since Salsa is so weak as a protagonist, he and we rely on the much stronger Facade to save us from enemies. So in this light, the person who hurts Salsa the most can appear to be a reliable ally. Mother 3's creator, Shigesato Itoi, explains that this all evokes complex emotions that another storytelling medium, like a novel, wouldn't be able to portray in the same way. And I agree, playing as Salsa may not be the most fun you'll have in the world of Mother 3, but it's a fascinating, working example of the potential unique to interactive media. Facade himself is a high-ranking incognito member of the Pigmask army who's been busy trying to gradually exploit the more impulsive, status-seeking villagers, like Tazmilly's mayor, by acting with a false kindness and promise for grandeur. Under the guise of a benefactor, he's pitching Tazmilly's recent disasters not as inflicted attacks by his army, but as inexplicable happenings. Bad omens that warn of an evil beyond their understanding. If the villagers don't listen to him now, things will only get worse. And besides, why pass on the prospect of true happiness? In order to sell his BS, Facade needs Salsa to accompany his preaching as an example of the benevolent bliss he's trying to bestow. How can one argue with the joy of a monkey dancing happily to this man's tune? The pair of them have to first travel back to the village though, so after kicking Salsa out into the expanse of the aptly named Death Desert, he makes the monkey lead him through a treacherous trek to a secret tunnel that allows them undetected passage into Tazmilly. Refusal makes for fried salsa, of course, but it also puts his captured girlfriend's life in peril. So when a cactus wolf blocks the entrance to the underpass, Salsa has no choice but to try and dispatch it. The creature looks like a chimera, but it interestingly won't stand down to Facade. So if it is one of the Pigmask's experiments, then it may just be the first to have gone rogue, foreshadowing the fact that these soldiers are in way over their heads, with more unruly creations to come, like the almost mecha lion and the ultimate chimera. Once the deranged dingo disappears, the door to the underground tunnel can be entered, where a futuristic vehicle called the Pork Bean waits to be driven. There's an entire transportation system leading directly to the primitive Tazmilly from here, suggesting that the pig's plan to infiltrate has been a long time coming. Fast forwarding to the next day in the town's plaza, Facade's all-important speech is able to convince some that their perfect world is in jeopardy and that the solution lies with him. He sermonizes that happiness is not just an intangible concept, it's an attainable thing in the form of a glowing pink object known as a happy box. Just look at its effect on Salsa. The quote-unquote benevolent Facade is giving them away for free, but what do these things even do, and what is their real, no doubt nefarious purpose? Happy boxes, despite how they look, are absolutely not televisions. Itoi deliberately had their designs changed countless times to try and make them not look like TV sets. It seems that they do have screens, but the boxes aren't displaying anything, so Itoi says that they could even be fish tanks. Because of this, I've always just taken them at face value. They're small, pink boxes that effuse a mesmerizing glow. An inconspicuous thing like a lava lamp, but much more alluring, because people look forward to watching them after a long day of work, and can become so engrossed that they don't even notice the presence of others while staring at it. There's a good chance that some sort of subtle brainwashing is in effect here, which would give another reason for why everyone eventually follows Facade and the Pigmask so obediently. If you can believe this theory, it would mean Facade's spiel has a dark truth to it, since these people can achieve happiness in ignorance, if they opt to numb themselves and mindlessly obey while their peaceful way of life is twisted to the will of a dastardly dictator. Speculation aside, the happy boxes serve as markers for compliance, used later by the military to denote which houses are exempt from their manufactured lightning strikes. After convincing a few impressionable villagers with the superficially smiling salsa, try checking in a mirror for some seriously depressing flavor text about how he actually feels. Facade forces the animal to be a parcel monkey and deliver the happy boxes to all who've requested them in a timely manner. He promises a reward for a job well done, a special treat, since he feels terrible the monkey hasn't been allowed to eat or drink anything yet, having wolfed down the last banana they found himself. Just as pitifully as Salsa was able to slip on that very peel though, he'll be cruelly zapped as recompense, no matter how fast the task was finished. Facade's in an even worse mood than usual, and it's because the story is now caught up to the moment in which Duster and his gang are closing in on the treasure in a Sohei castle that the Pigmasks have been hunting for by order of Facade. This is the last chapter in the game to run concurrently with another, so all previous plot threads that haven't yet intertwined do so now, with oddities like the sudden torrent from Chapter 2 revealed to have been Facade's doing all along. He's the reason Duster and the precious hummingbird egg are now missing. Furious that his plan to secure the item has failed, but using Duster's absence to fortify his web of lies, the man and monkey head back to the inn, passing by a very skeptical Princess Kumatora. Having likely used telepathy to read Salsa's mind, she and Wes appear that night to free him from the trigger-happy man, and hopefully get the last non-forced laugh. A nui hee hee in the distance dispels that optimism though, as the trio finds themselves cornered by Facade's cronies. Just when it seems that there's no escaping the incoming fleet of pork tanks, Lucas arrives, accompanied by a Drago family, which is most likely the Mecha Drago's kin from Chapter 1. Lucas orders this non-roboticized creature to kill. Just kidding, but the swine all take quite the beating, which surely means Facade's learned his lesson, right? Join me next time for Dark Aspects of Mother 3, Chapter 4, to see why that is very much not the case. It's unfortunate, although this incident was integral in awakening the fighting spirit inside Lucas. The main character will be sticking with from this point in the game up until its conclusion. I'll see you in 3 years, everyone. The first 3 chapters of Mother 3 are distinctive from the rest of the game because they all explore the same time frame through the lens of many different characters. It gives us the opportunity to see new sides of Tazmilly's residents, as their mannerisms can change depending on who's in the party. When Alec accompanied his son-in-law on his journey to the Drago Plateau, he worked to lighten the mood by cracking dumb jokes, but when we approach him as Salsa the monkey, we're able to see a more solemn side to the man as he grieves for his daughter in solitude. In the time that Flint is out searching for Klaus in the mountains, Duster can check in on Lucas, who is understandably no longer able to sleep peacefully at night, following his mother's death and his brother's disappearance. Like a great tapestry, these extra details and plot threads are intertwining to create the huge, beautiful image that is Mother 3. Now, after switching protagonists one final time, the story does nothing but move forward chronologically. We play as Lucas for the first time since the prologue, after a 3-year time skip as Tazmily is revealed to have changed drastically, for the better and for the worse. Back when this game was cancelled for release on the Nintendo 64, Shigesato Itoi described the Nowhere Islands pre-time skip as a strange place you can't quite decipher between the Middle Ages or the Old West. It's a stark change of a main setting from the first 2 games, which took place in urban, modern-day, at the time, cities like this new Tazmily. So for a lot of Mother fans that went into 3 expecting a similar kind of atmosphere, this is where the game really begins. What was once a rustic, primitive little village is now a sprawling, technologically advanced town. There are transportation systems in place, with paved roads and a railway. along with plenty of expanding businesses like Jackie's grandiose hotel in place of a cozy inn. That's because Tazmily now uses currency, replacing the residents' old system of bartering, or simply taking what they needed for free. Assad has essentially won. With Duster missing, he's been able to silence Wes. So with no real threat to his rule, the man's convinced nearly everyone to accept a happy box. And the few who haven't yet converted, like poor Reggie here, have their homes bombarded by lightning strikes. This means that Alex's log cabin in the mountains, where the game originally started us off, has been sadly reduced to rubble, and Lucas's home has become a frequented tourist spot, Tazmily's famous lightning house. While the sheep for some reason don't seem to mind, their fur's been scorched and the barn's been burned down. The pigmasks, through manipulation or their own delusion, use the remnants of these recalcitrants' homes as an example of what happens when you refuse their reign. Villagers like Isaac have really embraced the pigmasks and what they're doing, to the extreme that he's now convinced the plain animals that once populated the forest years ago were boring. You like these slither hens better? Really? And you're going to admit that to Lucas, of all people, who lost his mother to a chimera? Not all hope is lost, though. When Lucas interrupts a conversation between Jackie and Bronson concerning Duster's whereabouts, he gets clued in about a Duster lookalike, Lucky, a legendary bass player part of the rock group DCMC, who perform live at the interestingly named Club Titty-Boo. This entertainment venue is exclusive to factory workers employed by the pigmasks, who are enlisting diggers here for two major reasons. The first is to unearth clay as material to make more soulless soldiers that are brought to life by a jolt of electricity. The second reason, though, is a secret objective: to try and uncover a rumored underground dragon that's unbelievably huge, as big as the Nowhere Islands. That is going to be important later, so for now, let's just discuss the growing army of servants that never complain. Shigesato Itoi mentioned that the inspiration behind the Claymen are actually mythological tales and folklore about the creation of humans. One could argue that these Claymen are people too, forced into slave labor the moment they're born and ordered to continue on without breaks until they run out of energy. It's only when they are no longer physically able to exert themselves that they get a recharge, and even then, it's back to the workforce right away. Whatever Itoi's intention, he hoped that players would get a taste of the Claymen's sadness and endless sorrow when they look at them. How depressing. To be perfectly honest, I didn't really reflect on the Claymen in a profound way when I first reached this point in the game. I suppose I thought of them more as a type of brainless robot, but Itoi seems to have implied here that they have feelings too. Pair that with the agonizing sounding moans despite drudging along for their heartless masters, and you've got a disturbing existence that deserves our pity. This all makes the game's ending even sadder than it already is, watching this abandoned Clayman breaking its back for nobody, while marching diligently to its doom. As for the human factory workers, they all appear to be fine with their positions, but everyone seems to only be doing it for the tickets to Club Titty-Boo. One of several distractions from a menial, monotonous job the pigmasks implemented likely as a way to keep themselves and their laborers just content enough to not revolt. While some workers, like the aforementioned Isaac, have become fully dedicated to working hard and climbing that corporate ladder. I can see the factory being an allegory for the grueling job conditions of real-world big business juggernauts like Amazon. The goal of this chapter is to reach said factory, then work part-time there to gain access to Club Titty-Boo and see if the bum-looking musician really is Duster. But both buildings are quite a ways from Tazmily. The factory workers travel there by train at a heavily reduced rate. Lucas is not yet employed though, so in order to make it there quickly, he has to traverse the tracks by foot. It's a dangerous departure, even when dismissing the increasingly deadly chimeras that lurk in the tunnel and beyond. The biggest threat to Lucas's life? The train itself. In fact, it'd be so half-witted to enter unprepared that a pair of brothers stop Lucas repeatedly, saving his life if he tries to run through at the wrong time. It's darkly funny to me that they're convinced Lucas won't stop trying due to a sheer self-destructive urge, made a little disturbing if you know about Lucas's actions in The Third Lie. The book, featuring the character of the same name, Mother 3's Lucas was inspired by. If you don't know what I'm talking about or want to learn more, I'll link my video series along with an updated write-up I did for Mother Forever, so you can see the many ways in which Agoda Christoph's depressing book trilogy relates to this game. You are legitimately able to be hit by a train, which sends you all the way back to Tazmily, so the Mr. T lookalike twins' warnings do have merit. Nevertheless, Lucas is eventually able to convince the first one of his own capability, and he'll discover even more of that potential as a result of what he finds within the tunnel. I should probably have saved the next topic for another episode of Nintendo Innuendo, but I thought it was worth addressing here on Dark Aspects anyway because of how unforgettable a moment it is. You might remember Ionia, a powerful Magypsy last seen with Aeolia, the one who recognized Klaus's potential and taught him an unmanageable psychic technique. 3 years later, Ionia is seen again in different circumstances, foreshadowed by a pile of traditionally feminine-looking clothes lay strewn on the ground below a cliffside hot spring. Naturally, climbing the ladder and entering the bath reveals a startled Magypsy, who is currently stark naked. Despite interrupting a private soak, Ionia offers to enlighten Lucas and awaken his budding magical potential. The scene that follows is seemingly worrisome, as the nude, longevous human-like entity approaches the boy and the screen fades to black. Our imagination is left to fill in the blanks, as uncomfortable dialogue telling him not to struggle is all we have to work with. Then, the picture comes back and Lucas emerges from underneath the water with a wealth of new talents. So what happened here, and why is it so suggestive? Well, the answer is that nothing really obscene took place during this sequence. I've heard some fans explain it as a sort of baptism, a spiritual ritual that unlocks powers of the psyche, and I like that, but my interpretation is that his powers awakened as a fight or flight defense mechanism. Being held underwater and having nearly drowned, his body was pushed to its absolute limit. Perhaps in the world of Mother 3, it takes a near-death experience or an intense physical stress to be able to realize these psychic powers. That does fall in line with all the other times Sai is learned in this game. My point is that it's clear nothing provocative occurred here, but to say it's innocent would be incorrect because the implications were intentional. Itoi made it this way to raise eyebrows, a story development he says only a grown-up could have created. He goes on to explain how he did not write this encounter with a child's heart in mind. Rather, he wanted to approach things from an older man's perspective. In the future, if I happen to live to be 90 years old, I want one of those kids to come to me as a grown-up and say, "A long time ago, in 3rd grade, I played Mother 3. I was really nervous and confused about what was going on in the hot spring in that tunnel, and that's what led me to the place I am today." It's also worth noting that this is the first time Lucas and Klaus have their identities confused in the story by an outsider, as when Ionia first meets Lucas, the boy is mistaken for his twin. This is another element that's important to remember later, as we'll discuss in the next chapter. With exception to PK Starstorm and Teleport from the previous Mother games, new Sai abilities typically came with higher levels of experience. In Mother 3 though, there are several more Sai moves realized in all kinds of crazy ways beyond Lucas's awakening. Like the second game's Prince Pooh, Kumatora is taught the mystical PK Starstorm, but instead of mastering it off-screen, we're shown a brutal way in which it's learned. Lucas learns PK Flash in a similar manner, but by unlucky coincidence when he's struck by a bolt of lightning in an unmissable cutscene. I suppose that's faster than training. And even though there are still plenty of techniques locked behind levels like the previous games, they aren't learned instantaneously this time, because it hits the Sai user as a sickness to overcome, a fever that has them sweating and disables their ability to run. Itoi, as the eccentric visionary he is, specifically equates this concept to that of menstruation. One of Itoi's themes with Mother 3, and really the Mother series as a whole, starting with Ninten's asthma causing him to miss in battle, is representing the physiology of the human body. Itoi believes that whenever a human being develops or learns a new ability, the body really takes a beating, So whenever he's feeling sluggish and exhausted, he's absolutely certain that good things will follow. When you're given an overwhelming problem you just can't deal with, the only way to cope with it is to completely mobilize your heart and your mind and make a strenuous effort to get through it. This quote really resonated with me when I first read it, because ever since I was a child I've suffered from migraines, intense headaches that leave me completely at the mercy of the agony I'm experiencing. I can't tell you how many sleepless nights I've had curled up on the bathroom floor or pulled over in my car somewhere waiting for it to pass. Itoi's positive interpretation of what it means to make it through the pain has given me an optimistic outlook, when it's far easier to dwell on the negative and think, why is this happening to me? To get real for a moment, I've been able to use this as motivation for mental illness as well. Back in high school, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, but I've had it for much longer, about 14 years now. For those that aren't familiar, it basically means that for most of the day, every day, I'm having some kind of irrational, intrusive thought, which gives me varying degrees of anxiety that will not dispel until an action, a compulsion, is performed to get rid of it. Doing so offers temporary relief, but fuels an endless cycle when another unwanted fear enters my brain. It's like an internal alarm going off 24/7 telling me that something is seriously very wrong. OCD is a draining, chronic illness that takes a lot away from me, but in many ways I genuinely believe that it has made me a better person. To try and quell its symptoms, I make an effort to take care of myself, and I'm always looking into wellness options. I'm also very empathetic and patient with other people because you never know what they're going through on the inside. And this philosophy of growing stronger through pain Itoi's integrated into his games has given me a fresh perspective. It helps me remember that not all turmoil is needless suffering. In some situations, great things can follow. For Lucas, there's an actual light at the end of the tunnel, or not, the factory is kind of sad, but he reaches it nevertheless. After performing dull tasks, he finally earns a ticket to the nightclub, but because he's underage and because of a strict no-dog policy, Lucas and Boney are denied access. Or they would have been if Kumatora hadn't vouched for them simply being mistaken for a kid and a dog. Yes, Boney, aka Woof, the dog-like dude, thankfully keeps up this ridiculous disguise for a good while longer. Kumatora herself has been working undercover as a waitress at Club Titty Boo for the same reason Lucas is here, to try and talk to Duster. So now that they're all here, they have to seize the opportunity tonight. Once they are able to meet with him, it's learned that Duster's become an amnesiac, perhaps due to accidentally activating the hummingbird egg's power to contain a person's memories, meaning he's not sure what his life was like before he joined the DCMC. Destiny calls though, so he's willing to travel with the pack of misfits anyway, leaving behind his bandmates as an emotional farewell sends the heroes off to yet again try and retrieve this mysterious egg. Lucas, Duster, Kumatora, and Boney. These are the four main characters that will see the game through to its end, finally all together in one party. I hope you'll join me for Dark Aspects of Mother 3 Chapter 5. Where I'll discuss the Masked Man, as we disguise ourselves yet again and eventually face off against Facade. Thank you all for watching. From a gameplay perspective, Mother 3's Chapter 5 is special, in that it is the only chapter in which the main cast stays together for its entire duration. They don't get separated and have to reunite like in Chapter 7, nor does Boney run off ahead of the group as we'll see in Chapter 8. Right now, it's just four misfit heroes, tasked with finding that infamously elusive hummingbird egg, and then destroying the Pigmask Army's Tower of Thunder, responsible for destroying the homes of military recalcitrants, which is what our protagonists are. Yes, even the dog with lightning. The titanic turret at the top, which can be seen as early as Chapter 4, reveals the way in which the enemy is targeting those opposed to their reign. But how exactly are they generating that much energy to begin with? The answer lies with these enslaved electric catfish. They are poor creatures worked to exhaustion, much like the unfortunate Clayman puppets, as also introduced in the last chapter. But while the Claymen do their bidding without question, because they don't know any better, these catfish must be provoked in order to be useful to their pig masters. The catfish have to feel fear specifically, so the soldiers managing their output try and utilize new scare tactics to elicit surprise, which in turn equates to a higher rate of kilozaps per hour. In other words, they have to receive a shock in order to produce one. It's yet another way the opposition demonstrates abuse. These forlorn fishes are captives made to live in terror, relentlessly agitated and exploited for their power. Perhaps one positive to come from this is the fact that the pig masks have to make themselves look like fools, as they invent different ways to startle their victims, who are all adapting to their increasingly predictable methods. Not that these blundering boars needed any help in making themselves look bad, but still. The catfish's predicament is all the more motivation to put this place out of commission. And even though what their fabricated lightning is being used for isn't really a concern for the majority of Tasmali's residents, who proudly display their acceptance of the army's rule so they aren't affected and fail to see a problem, we must trek on to liberate the few who still resist. As heartless as the oppressors are in general though, they are still human. And while it's most certainly a little too late, some of them are even beginning to realize that what they're doing is bad. Recognizing and admitting your wrongdoing is the first step towards change. And while this line here is made out to be more of a joke than a profound statement, Mother 3, from here on out, will continue stirring where it's most comfortable, in the morally gray, while unreluctantly dipping into the Vanta Black, of course. Keeping on the topic of the Pigmask army, the existence of a clear hierarchy is starting to become more obvious. There are the pink uniformed foot soldiers, blue-donned pigmask captains, green-wearing majors, and cloaked in white colonels. Following this chapter, we'll even see underwater patrols, amusingly called Navy Squeals. Besides color and size, in the case of the fierce pork trooper, there are differences in their ensemble, like the colonel's capes, and while it's only a couple of pixels, you can tell that the captains have a kind of service medal pinned to their chests, while the majors have two, another way to denote their higher rank. Facade's position is of course a type of commander, but there are others like him high up on the ladder, such as a mysterious character many refer to as the Commander. This masked man is unintentionally integral to the party's success in Chapter 5, because Lucas is conveniently mistaken for him and granted complete access to his adversary's confidential sectors because of it. Lots of players, myself included, might not question this first quote-unquote coincidence at the parent Clayman factory. I know that the reason for the mix-up is obvious in hindsight, but do keep in mind it wasn't very long ago that we passed Boney off as a human by giving him a shirt and a hat. These are just army grunts who aren't shown to be the brightest bunch. So mistaking this random kid for their commanding officer, they may have never actually met in person, is a bit strange, but it shouldn't be too surprising. When I first played this game, I remember adopting a just roll with it mentality for some of its scenarios. I was also eager to progress the story, so I couldn't put the USB controller, the Game Boy Advance, down, which means I didn't really spend a lot of time guessing what happens next. However, it is at this point in the game that keen players familiar with certain storytelling tropes can start to recognize which direction the plot is taking, because this commander, the masked man, is Lucas's twin brother Klaus. And let me just say, I really like how the game handles this reveal. The last time we were shown Klaus, he was presumed dead, and so much has happened since then that he's likely not on the player's mind at this point. But all it takes is the right hint to establish the connection. So the game drops clues that the masked man might be a revived Klaus, with vague indications that become increasingly pronounced. So many in fact that I'm convinced Shigesato Itoi intended for players to reach this conclusion, or at least have a suspicion, before the game outright spells it out for them. Think about it. In Chapter 5, there's this case of mistaken identity, supported by the prominent orange color of his outfit, and the scrolling text at the end calling his profile youthful. Then in Chapter 7, when Lucas encounters him, the screen flashes in a notable way. It's similar to when Kumatora read Salsa's mind with telepathy back in chapter 3, but when that happened, the screen flashed white. This time, a sort of teal-colored tint is applied that's only ever used in particular flashbacks, like when Lucas remembered his mom and how she'd help him get ready for the day. I'm betting that Lucas, and maybe even Klaus, both sense a strange familiarity here, but the feeling isn't powerful enough for them to recognize each other. In my opinion though, the strongest piece of evidence comes when it's time to actually face the masked man in battle for the first time, as the instrument linked to his attack sound is that of a sitar, which was heard only once before when we briefly fought by Klaus's side in the prologue. It seems that Kumatora is the first of your party to catch on. This is all important to mention because it shows that these subtleties are here if you're looking for them. So if you know someone who was maybe interested in experiencing Mother 3 for themselves but never did because they were spoiled about the masked man, I'd reassure them that it doesn't really matter. Besides, there are plenty more mind-blowing surprises in store that aren't as often spoken about. And simply knowing who the masked man is will in no way prepare you for what happens during the finale anyway. As for why Klaus is working for the Pigmask army and how he's even alive, these are both questions that the player can actually solve early on too. As incompetent and bungling as these swine soldiers are, their technology is no joke. I've already discussed how their happy boxes are most likely tools for mind control, with more explicit examples introduced later on in the story, so Klaus's memories were likely forcibly repressed using a similar means. As far as how he's alive, animals fused with machine parts that give them new abilities make up a good majority of the enemy's devilish chimeras. So with technology that advanced, surely they could use it to save a nearly deceased human, or to totally resurrect one who's already passed on. Resuscitating Klaus, in whatever state he was found in then, was probably the pig's first experiment of this caliber, and it was a success, so they repeated the process to rebuild Facade. Wait a minute, rebuild Facade? I've gotten ahead of myself here, but we may as well keep this train going. So do Lucas and company end him in this chapter? No, that's actually all Facade's doing. He sort of probably kills himself by slipping on a peel from one of the bananas the glutton's always gorging on. Facade may not be a human. That's right, he's secretly the last Magypsy Locria, a traitor to their kind. But even so, it's hard to believe that anyone could have survived that far fall from Thunder Tower. The state of his reconstruction when we do see him again is disturbing too. Horns have been implanted into his face, so he now requires a robot translator to speak on his behalf. And Facade's not just reassembled once, but twice. Better give him more horns then. Much like Darth Vader, questioning if Darth Sidious purposely designed his obsolete, uncomfortable suit to restrict him, I'm thinking that Porky just cruelly toyed with Facade here like all of the other chimeras he's helplessly mixed and matched. Facade's final words to Lucas preceding his true demise in Chapter 8 is that this is all just Master Porky's game after all. And speaking of Porky, if his dangerously immature frame of mind wasn't evident enough already, His Highness's playroom should be an appropriate indication of where he's at mentally. Mother 3 doesn't reveal that King P is Ness's neighbor from the second Mother game until much later, so if this room didn't tip you off in a first run-through, then it's fantastic in hindsight. I'll talk about this in much greater detail in my final episode for Dark Aspects of Mother 3, but when we do eventually encounter Porky, he looks a little different than he did in EarthBound, because he's now become decrepit, with the appearance of an old man housed in the body of a child. We learn that this is due to him abusing time travel. He hasn't aged like a normal person, so not even Porky himself knows how old he is now. What is clear is that he still possesses the mind of a child too, as he surrounds himself with infantile things while indulging in all this sickeningly naive violence. What he's become and how he got here is pretty sad to think about. Porky had an awful childhood that he ran away from. But despite that, he's desperately nostalgic, and obsessively clings on to his past. Mother 3 develops and expands upon Porky's character pretty substantially here. It is in this very room that we first learn Porky may still consider Ness as a friend. which supports certain subtext from the previous game. In Mother 3, he keeps what's called the Friend's Yo-Yo, protected and heavily guarded in a special case. Trying to swipe it as Lucas is punishable by death. It's never confirmed that this Friend's Yo-Yo did indeed belong to Ness, but Itoi has stated that Porky didn't have any other friends. I interpret that Ness, his ultimate rival, was the closest person he ever had to a friend. Itoi himself then goes on to suggest that perhaps he'd always just been playing with Ness that whole time, paired with the fact that yo-yos were Ness's secondary weapon to baseball bats, both of which appeared frequently in Mother 2 but not 3, along with all of the other obvious homages to Ness's adventure in this room, then later on in New Pork City, and I have little reason to doubt the identity of this yo-yo's original owner. In different circumstances, maybe the two of them could have been good friends, but the time for that has long since passed, both metaphorically and literally, so it seems Porky just can't let go. The Masked Man, Facade, Porky, and his army. This video has been all about the villains of this game and the rush to obstruct their plans. So to cap things off, after a fateful fight inside the tower's generator room, Lucas and his friends manage an escape to, and then from, the top of the tower before it detonates. But they all fail to hang on to the mother pork ship that's carrying them. And, perhaps unbeknownst to them, the Masked Man too. Chapter 5 has been an exciting challenge fraught with risk all throughout, and it ended in an equally extreme way. Chapters 7 and 8, longer and even more intense. However, Chapter 6, Sunflower Fields, slows things down considerably. And it's needed as a brilliant break in the action. It stands as yet another reason one of Nintendo's darkest games shines brighter than most. Chapter 6 of Mother 3 is by far the game's shortest. You can finish it effortlessly in under 6 minutes, as all you physically have to do to make it through is make Lucas walk. The only challenge then comes emotionally, since there are no enemies to fight back here besides your own tears. Before I start gushing about why this chapter deserves its own video though, I should quickly summarize what happens. So after our heroes fall off of the Pigmask's mother pork ship, Kumatora and Duster are separated from each other, and from Lucas and Boney, who both drop to safety in a field of sunflowers, Lucas's deceased mother's signature favorite flower. As Lucas wanders alone aimlessly against the backdrop of a wavy, refracting blue sky, the voice of Hinawa calls out to her son in an effectively minimalist sentimental cutscene set in the memory of a room he was once cradled in as an infant. As Lucas returns from his daydream, the boy and his dog reunite and continue along the ill-defined path until the ghost of his mom begins fading into existence further ahead. In an attempt to catch up to her, the two carry on, with Boney running past him, until it's just mother and son, alone in a grass clearing where the cliff ends. Her ephemeral form no longer falters as she waits for Lucas just out of reach, but he leaps for her anyway. The desire to embrace the loved one he prematurely lost is so strong here that he jumped without regard for his own life. He was likely caught in a trance he couldn't or didn't think about breaking free from. This location feels phantasmagorical, which isn't out of place for the Mother series, so perhaps he figured that this was all a dream anyway and that he'd truly wake up soon. Because of its surreal nature, it seems that Lucas did imagine the field of sunflowers on his descent from the airship. Could it have been his own magic hint? But I think that it was a tangible place the spirit of Hinawa guided him and Boney through, because directly below the precipice she stops at is a soft landing prepared by her father, after she visited him in a dream and told him to pile hay in this specific spot. It's made clear that this wasn't a lucky coincidence. Hinawa has a limited ability to communicate with her family and their friends from the afterlife. This is supported by the fact that Kumatora was saved by her too. When Lucas eventually finds her, she mentions that a pretty woman dressed in red appeared in Doria's dreams, and foretold that Kumatora would fall into the pond near the Magypsy's house. Doria also claims that Duster's alright, which is a reassuring piece of information Hinawa could have passed along as well. This power to reach out in a transient state from beyond the grave, to directly and indirectly commune with the living, foreshadows her role during the game's climax, when her restless soul tries to mend the pieces of her broken family. But that all comes later. In Chapter 6 itself, there's no dialogue at all. And, like Flint's breakdown in Chapter 1, it's surprising for a game series in which the player characters don't often emote, a game series in which its words do the heavy lifting. However, in true Shigesato Itoi fashion, the unconventional choice is an effective one. It's perhaps Mother 3's most iconic moment, and I don't think anyone who's played this game can forget how the trip through sunflower fields resonated with them. The almost reunion between Lucas and his late mother, chasing an apparition of what was the most important person in his life, is heartrending. The music is utterly poignant too, really kicking in when she appears for the first time. Listening to these two tracks by Shogo Sakai outside of the game is enough to transport me right back into the shoes of Lucas, to re-envision what it must be like for him during this sequence. Being a mostly silent protagonist, he's a character that we can all project a bit of ourselves into, playing into Itoi's goal of making Mother 3 like a mirror, one that reflects the heart of the player off of the screen. I can only sympathize with those players who have lost their own mothers and can empathize personally with Lucas. I debated merging this bite-sized episode of Dark Aspects with the previous one, but I ultimately decided against it because I really wanted to highlight how significant this segment is on its own. I know that this is more akin to sad aspects than dark aspects, but I feel that the game's heavy theme of losing a parent and the associated grief culminates to this moment. It's bittersweet. Yes, Hinawa can no longer somatically comfort Lucas, but she'll always be a part of his life and she'll continue to look out for him from above. We are sadly nearing the end of this journey through the dark aspects of Mother 3, but the final 2 episodes will be the biggest yet. I'll see you all then. Shigesato Itoi's vision for the original Mother was to create a counterpoint to another game series he really enjoyed, but had one minor problem with: Dragon Quest. Why was it that all role-playing games that were popular at the time had swords and magic? In Itoi's words, RPGs in a medieval Europe setting are definitely flourishing these days, but I don't know anything about medieval Europe, and I suspect no one else does either, if you want to know the truth. It seems that everyone just bases their ideas off famous works like The Lord of the Rings. So I thought, if I'm going to make something, then a modern story would be far more interesting. Itoi started thinking about what kinds of things he would do if he made the same sort of game, and Mother was born as a result. Mother 3 still very much follows in this idea of a modern story, but it embraces its inspiration much more than the games that preceded it. Do you remember that strange comment about a giant dragon sleeping underneath the Nowhere Islands? That wasn't just a local legend. The insignia etched into the Forest Prayer Sanctuary signifies the island's very real protector, dubbed the Dark Dragon. According to Ionia, the dragon's power was too great for humans to control, so the Magypsy's ancestors put it to sleep with 7 magical needles, one for each of the separate Magypsies to guard. A Magypsy's millennia-long life is bound to the needle they protect, too. So once theirs is finally released, they cease to be, a reality their kind reveres rather than resents. Lucas, and by extension his twin brother Klaus, are the so-called chosen boys capable of pulling these needles and freeing the dragon, because they harness an exclusive Psi ability that not even Magypsies can use, PK Love. It is said that if the person who pulls the needles possesses an evil heart, then that evil will be passed on to the dragon, who will fulfill their ambitions no matter how wicked. However, the opposite is also true. If the dragon is awakened by a person with a heart of good, then the fate of all evil will be washed away, and all life as we know it will shine brightly. Master Porky somehow heard about this wish-granting dragon and its needles, likely directly from Facade/Locria, the fallen Magypsy, before learning that Klaus, his newly reconstructed slave, is able to pull them. So Mother 3's final chapters, 7 and 8, become a race between Lucas and his robotized brother to see who can pull the majority of these needles and become the dragon's master. It's a classic fight for the fate of the world. What's really interesting though is that this isn't necessarily a battle between good and evil, because while Porky himself is evil, Klaus isn't. As the masked man, he knows nothing but to follow Porky's orders. The masked man has no heart of his own, both figuratively and literally, as neither Ionia or Mixolydia can sense it from him, and both of his battle themes are missing a heartbeat. Thankfully, Itoi has revealed what he imagines would have happened if the heartless masked man won. According to Itoi, everything, even the breath of life itself, would go extinct. Even the dragon too. That is a horrifying thought. It's an ending Itoi says he couldn't write, because it would mean that he himself would no longer be alive. Reality would cease to be forever. It's possible that Porky could have known this, but I don't think so. Because the Magypsies don't even consider the possibility of one without a heart pulling their needles. And during Porky's battle, he correctly asserts that if the dragon wakes up, it might end up destroying everything and extinguishing all life, before incorrectly claiming that he and the dragon would still survive as the last two living things in the world. He's supposedly more than willing to spend eternity with the dark dragon and nothing else. Because he's Porky, he's stubborn and childish enough to want that. But is he okay with utterly blipping out of existence? Whatever it is you think Locria told Porky, Lucas is informed here by Ionia, who's found bound and gagged at the beginning of Chapter 7, after being attacked by the opposition. Most players here likely make a beeline for where they're supposed to be headed next to get help. The game gives you an obvious way to fast travel to Aeolia's house and all, but wandering around Tazmily and speaking to others yields hilarious results, as why would you be taking your time talking to them when there's someone behind you bound in rope? Poor Ionia's hopping around trying to keep up with Lucas's sprinting. Even funnier is the fact that Lucas could have untied them, but nobody thought about it until they've reached their destination. Anyway, after getting Aeolia up to speed, and to Ionia's great surprise, the Magypsy begins to vanish when the masked man pulls the needle they guard, not well enough, clearly, in a Sohei castle. Considering how unexpected this was, Aeolia's genuine acceptance of their fate is nothing short of admirable, finding peace in death, along with turning the otherwise quote-unquote macho world of the game on its head, are themes Itoi wanted to portray with these characters. Before disappearing for good, Aeolia offers an underground passageway, leading directly to the castle's courtyard, so Lucas and Ionia can investigate. It is here, after an explanation from the Magypsy and upon discovering the masked man's transceiver, that the Nowhere Islands almost completely opens up to the player, as the next 4 needles can be visited in any order. There is a clear, linear path, as you are heavily encouraged to go to the Chimera Lab and reunite with Kumatora first, but you can head to Saturn Valley and save Duster before that if you don't mind facing the stronger enemies. If you're a glutton for punishment or just very, very patient, you can even skip them both and head straight to Thane Island as just a boy and his dog. If you're interested, I recently uploaded a video detailing the changes that occur when tackling Thane with different party members. For now though, I'm just going to go with the flow without sequence breaking. Don't worry, I will get to Thane towards the end. Besides that nightmare and certain floors of Porky's Tower to come, I'd say the Chimera Lab is probably the creepiest area in the game, because it's the birthplace of this game's impious chimeras. I've used plenty of footage of the interior already in previous episodes, but to paint the macabre picture and as an example, there are skeletons of mixed and matched monsters on display in one room, while another has full-bodied animals and animal parts stored in test tubes. Disconcertingly, we see that a good majority of the friendly Dragos from Chapter 1 ended up here. There's a skull of a young Drago, a fully grown Drago encased in ice, kept frozen and preserved alongside other animals, and tools next to an operating table with constraints big enough to hold a Drago for experimentation. On the top floor of the laboratory, there's a room with a glass divider that has a luxurious sitting area on one side, then an empty space with elevator access on the other. I think it's likely that this is supposed to be a viewing spot for whenever Porky himself visits the lab. Can you imagine scientists bringing up an abomination like the Horsantula while Porky watches with a big dumb grin on his face? Just let your hatred for him work as fuel for the semi-final battle. Oh, and speaking of, this memo about the kind of chimeras I want implies that Porky eats them, as he requests chimeras with a decent flavor and scent. Talk about twisted, but I guess as Lucas you can technically eat chimeras too, with hot dog sushi. The Chimera Lab is also where the game changes genres to survival horror, because eventually, Lucas and company will be clued in about the scariest thing in the entire building being set loose by our old friend Salsa the Monkey. It makes every pig mask fear for their lives, and for good reason. The ultimate chimera is the biggest and baddest of all their creations. A huge red demon at the top of the food chain. It has a ridiculously gigantic maw that can instantaneously incapacitate anything that comes within its reach. The best way to tell if you're safe is by listening. If all you can hear are the sounds of pig masks squealing, caused by the ultimate chimera's roaring, then you're actually safe, as that means it's in another room chasing some other poor sap. However, if the music starts back up again like normal, then you need to evacuate, because that means the thing's really close. Thankfully, this battery-operated beast does have a weakness with the off switch on its back, but the bird perched on top is able to move on its own volition, so it easily resets its ferocious friend after Salsa powered it down to save us. There's no need to worry though, as it's no longer in the lab. Or perhaps that's precisely why we should be more worried. An ultimate chimera-sized hole and an immobilized pig mask let us know that this machine made for murder is now out somewhere in the wild. This can bring about an anxious tension in new players, because it means that at any given point in the story moving forward, this killing chimera could pop out of nowhere. The pig mask's protocol for if it ever did escape essentially boils down to give up. So what if it's encountered later, as some climactic boss fight right before the end? Hey, if it took Porky's place in line, it could have been called the penultimate chimera, but that doesn't happen. The next and last time you'll dance with this devil is comical, as it bursts out of a thunderbox in Porky's all-you-can-pee toilet dungeon. I think it's genius, as the total surprise does still offer a scare despite your surroundings. I know some fans would have liked a cooler send-off for this monster, but meeting it again in a restroom maze just feels very Mother to me. I've already talked about the Masked Man and Facade's rebirth in Chapter 5, so go watch that episode if you haven't already, but I think it's now time to skip ahead to the moment I'm sure many of you have been waiting for, Thane Island. Oh, wait, there is one more very important thing to mention before that, and it is these scary stories these fright bots tell in order to torture the Mr. Saturns. I'd go into further detail, but they're admittedly a little too dark for me and this series. Their pants-wettingly scary story in particular is what many cite as the reason Mother 3 hasn't had an official localization yet. The exact content of these spine-tingling stories are left to the player's imagination, but the ESRB would have to give the game an M rating for the implications alone. Whoops, they accidentally told a cute, funny story. Joking aside, the next segment I want to talk about is absolutely not played for laughs. Well, what happens at our destination isn't. The journey to get to Thane, which involves crossing the ocean floor, is still filled with shenanigans. Specifically these oxygen supply machines, modeled after mermen, who must give you an exaggerated lip lock for air. And instead of a fade to black, the screen turns pink when you use them. These merman machines were made for the Pigmask army, and oxygen refills have to be required frequently for underwater patrol. So why were they designed this way? Because its creator thought it was funny? Or did they think it would be enjoyable? This navy squeal towards the surface seems to like them, which begs the question, why is a centaur variant with the same function found in Porky's fan room? That thought is more blood-curdling than the Frightbot's stories. So let's move along to Master Eddie, the guardian deity of the sea and his unwinnable boss fight. After your team whittles down the sentient whirlpool's health enough, he'll summon an inescapable vortex that knocks everybody out. Luckily, they're saved by the aforementioned oxygen machines. See, these things aren't that bad, but all of our heroes' items floated away because of the attack. And, as a nearby frog points out, who's having a bit of a crisis himself, you are all at death's door with 1 hit point remaining. Assuming your full party's with you, Kumatora will be the one to suggest that the lot of them search for something nearby to eat, so that they can all recover their strength. But as it's too dangerous to backtrack, and with a rotten zombie shroom blocking the way forward, the only edible food that's available are these fresh, funky looking mushrooms. Yes, they're a sickly purple color, but hey, what could go wrong? Everything. After consumption, Lucas and his friends are suddenly overcome by an odd sensation. The world around them twists and bends while psychedelically changing color, until they pass out again face down on the ground, before waking up in an altered reality where the trees and the ocean have turned a vibrant pink, while roaming monsters appear as familiar faces, taking the form of our protagonist's friends and family. There's post boxes to peek into with disturbing messages and erratic descriptions within, repeating uncomfortable phrases over and over again, not unlike the previous game's final boss fight. This is my favorite segment of Mother 3, because so many of these lines still send chills down my spine. Inside the mailbox were countless screams. Inside the mailbox was the sound of yourself crying. Inside the mailbox was absolutely nothing. Nothing after nothing came bursting out. And that's just the stuff that's generally terrifying. It gets even worse as the visions of loved ones dig deep into the personal traumas these characters have endured, especially Lucas. His missing brother Klaus appears several times, and looks just as he would have if he had the chance to grow up normally. He'll allude to his supposed death, telling Lucas that he's the Klaus you can't see, and that Lucas should touch his beating heart. The twins' deceased mother is mentioned a few times when an illusion of their father asks why she hasn't returned home yet, and blames Lucas, then himself, and Lucas again, for her disappearance. Finally, there's a couple of lines where this phony Flint is outright abusive, telling his son that Daddy's going to beat him. You could call this place the game's equivalent to Moonside, because it's a mind-bending version of a real in-game place. However, while Moonside was eerie with disconcerting undertones, the Thane hallucinations are overtly evil. Some of the dialogue is similarly nonsensical, sure, but a lot of it isn't. Everyone's waiting for you. Everyone's waiting to throw rocks at you, spit on you, and make your life hell. Who's everyone? Everyone you love. This line right here was inspired by one of Itoi's greatest fears. If I had to say what my worst kind of nightmare might be, it would involve my friends and family all being evil. Before revealing this, he mentions having tried to tone down the initial temporary dialogue used in Thane just enough by rewriting it, because the text was so unpleasant to look at. It's crazy to think that what we ended up getting here is the toned down version, but it's easier to imagine when considering that while she's mentioned by name, the party encounters no hallucinations of Hinawa. Thane certainly pushes the envelope as is, but the ways in which Lucas's mom could have been used are gut-wrenching to envision. What if an apparition of her appeared to directly tell Lucas that she didn't love him anymore? Or to ask why he couldn't save her, with her sprite then changing to something akin to the zombie lookalike back in Chapter 2 before attacking? The possibilities for opening up that wound even further are endless. With all this said, I'm not unhappy Itoi supposedly held back. I appreciate the equilibrium this game maintains as to not go too far. One of the reasons I feel Mother 3 works so well in its emotional delivery is the fact that no matter how grim things get, there's always a silly or heartwarming counterbalance around the corner. If Thane was all pain, without one of the post boxes containing lots of pretty butterflies for example, it'd be too much to stomach at once. You could say that Mother 3 is a master in portraying its dark aspects. That was a little long-winded, so maybe I need to be smacked upside the head like Lucas and his friends to snap out of the funk. To wrap things up here, after enduring everything on this gnarly island, the masked man still gets to pull its needle when he unfairly arrives via airship. At this point in the story, 5 of the 7 needles have already been pulled. The score? Masked Man 3, Lucas 2. This means that the stakes couldn't be any higher. Lucas has to pull the remaining 2, so that he'll have the majority required to pass his heart onto the dragon. Just 1 more needle is going to be pulled in this chapter though, with the very last one saved for the game's finale, of course. As the player, my next talking point becomes easiest to notice on what is the final return trip to Tazmily, because right now, Lucas's hometown is almost entirely vacant. At the beginning of this chapter, many of its original citizens were debating whether to pack their things and head for where the Pigmask leader resides, New Pork City. Gradually, as we've been pulling needles, or trying to, those thoughts have turned to actions, as more and more people begin to legitimately move there. And, like a social contagion, those left behind didn't want to miss out on the promise for grandeur, and decided to depart for the big city themselves. Towards the end of Chapter 7, Tazmily has finally been abandoned, save for a very few reluctant individuals and a mayor who's looking forward to ditching what he calls a miserable little village. A nearby sparrow reiterates the news while a slower, sad version of a song from Chapter 1, which was fittingly called Going Alone, plays in the background. This dispiriting new song, with the title And Then There Were None, replaces the forest track and even the similarly melancholic music that plays whenever Lucas's home is revisited by Lucas, evoking a true sense of emptiness, affirming the notion that this will be your last chance to explore Tazmily and its neighboring locales. Porky treated this village and everything in its vicinity like his personal playpen, or pigpen if you will, a place to house his toys to then leave behind when he loses interest. But developing the village and its surrounding areas was crucial to his endgame too, beyond his fascinating chimera project that helped satiate his malice and boredom, along with his factories that aided domination and his grand goal of unearthing the Dark Dragon. Tazmily itself and its rapid rate of growth encouraged consumerism in the worst possible way. It awakened a purely materialistic mindset that has perhaps laid dormant within these people, who may have once hailed from a world reminiscent of ours, a world I think was the one from Mother 2. Porky slowly inculcated a widespread motivation to leave Tazmily, so that all of its residents would voluntarily flock to him. It all started off as an innocent question. There's nothing bad about having too much happiness, is there? The thought of a happy box simply adding to Abby's joy turned into the belief that a happy box is the cause for her joy. That change from contentment to an endless desire for more made the call of the big city irresistible. I don't mean to sound too cynical here, but I think replacing the holes in our lives with stuff and stimulation is an ever-increasing first world problem. And Porky just abused that mentality to herd all of Tazmily to his own sinister, ostentatious turf. Is there anything more depressing than all of this? Surprisingly, yes, as we get the chance to encounter what might just be the embodiment of depression itself, Negative Man. This self-loathing thing is a strange creature that wastes its turns in battle, lamenting life and his own uselessness. There's just no way I can win, he utters, defeated before actually being defeated. When or if he does attack, he'll inflict pitiful, negligible damage. He is obviously susceptible to crying too, and funnily or tragically enough, his theme is strong one. Even when he's dispatched, exiting the cave and re-entering proves that Negative Man will forever respawn, so you can never fulfill his dismal wish to just get rid of him. He will indefinitely suffer in solitude here. That's probably the saddest way I could end a video, right? Well, not quite, as we'll see next time on the dark aspects of Mother 3 finale. Welcome all to a very special 30th episode of Dark Aspects, which also happens to be the 8th and final chapter to one of my favorite, if not my most favorite, game of all time, Mother 3. After 12 parts with nearly 3 hours worth of content total, we are finally at the conclusion for the Mother series. I have easily spent hundreds of hours researching and writing the 50 plus pages of scripts, recording them and editing everything together. It has been a labor of love, so I am both relieved and sad that it's all over after this. But don't worry, I will still make videos about the Mother series alongside Dark Aspects, of course. So far for Mother 3 alone, a game that looks as cute as this, you should keep in mind. We have talked about the following topics in depth. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but here they are. Today, we are going to talk about a great many more, including totalitarianism, parental abandonment, existential horror, sacrifice, child suicide, the annihilation of mankind and the world at large, and more. Chapter 7 last left off with Lucas pulling his third needle. The masked man has also pulled 3, so there's just one keeping the Dark Dragon and all of its divine power restrained. It is at this point, with nearly everyone having moved on from Tazmily over to his city, that the King P moniker is dropped, and now most refer to him by his actual name, Porky. He graciously invites Lucas and the rest of his friends to join everyone for what is, as best described by the DCMC's keyboardist, a festival for the end of all life. Porky has gathered all of the Nowhere Island's inhabitants and beyond, as he's been kidnapping people from different eras and forcing them to join his army for one twisted, apocalyptic celebration of the Dark Dragon's predestined awakening. Everyone has been envious of the supposedly superior New Pork City, but now that they're actually here, now that everyone is here, it's become obvious that this is a dystopia. The big city is an unclean, creepy, and crowded place that fills up with even more people as we progress the plot. Nothing here has substance. If the unusable and or fake goods in the flying limousine ride didn't tip you off, all the extravagance is for show. And there's this evil yet childlike innocence that permeates throughout, as foreshadowed by Porky's playroom back in Thunder Tower. He's created a warped kiddie wonderland, where he and everyone else can revel in his unhealthy past. Multiple robots, modeled after Porky's negligent mother, run a fast food shop, likely as a way to provide him with some sort of uncanny comfort. To everyone else, it's just unsettling, but also sad, as his real mother didn't love him, so he replaced her with something that will. It seems that nobody ever really liked Porky, save for maybe Electra, his maid in Mother 2 he replaced in this game with a look-alike. So he's forced everyone to surrender to him via reconstruction and brainwashing. This doesn't truly satisfy him though, because I think he knows deep down that nobody would legitimately love him without these means. So after making all of humankind submit, he plans to eliminate the species that betrayed him once and for all. He wishes for anyone who doesn't like him to be gone. And when you take away his tools for suppression, that extends to every single person and creature here. Everything terrible that's happened in this game is because Porky wants revenge on humanity. Likely through the combination of a carking childhood and Gigas' evil influence, he indulges in cruelty. Porky is a sadist, who disturbingly singles out Lucas as the one he wants to suffer most. I don't think he deliberately sought out Lucas at first or anything, as Hanawa's death seems to have just been an inadvertent result of his careless actions. Lucas probably became his primary target for 2 reasons. The first is obvious. Lucas is the only other chosen boy capable of awakening the wish-granting dragon, which can directly affect Porky's plans. The fact that his enslaved needle puller and Lucas are twins just adds that much more to his depraved sense of fun. The second reason though is more speculation on my end, but I think that whether it be from his appearance or status as a hero tasked with taking him down, Lucas probably reminds Porky of Ness, the arch-nemesis he clearly has unresolved feelings about. To focus more on this point, Porky wanted nothing more than to dominate his ultimate rival in the previous game, so when that plan failed, he resorted to a replacement. Porky's been spiraling down a progressively worsening moral path since the first time we met him. Shigesato Itoi describes both Porky and Facade's criminal descent as first being influenced by someone really terrible, like Gigas. Then what started off as playing around soon turned into dirty tricks. Dirty tricks evolved into unforgivable deeds, and not before long, evil sin. For more about this topic and Mother 3's own approach to evil, Itoi points us to a Shin Buddhism book called the Tanisho, which yes, I have read in preparation for this video. Nevertheless, Porky began his journey as a foil to Ness on the lesser but still extreme side of the spectrum, until his mean pranks and crimes became the evil sin Lucas has had to take the brunt of. That's really all it is. Lucas will continue to be Porky's punching bag until the Pig King falls. But before we confront him by climbing his Tower of Torment, we have to navigate this freak show and slump through the sewers to speak with an old friend. Leader, the too-tall bell ringer who's been imprisoned here by Porky, shocking I know, because of the secrets he keeps. In the biggest lore dump this series has ever seen, Leader reiterates that Tazmily was absolutely a painless paradise before the Pigmask army muddied it. But besides the newest generation of Tazmily, those who were born here like Lucas and Klaus, all of the islanders were immigrants that escaped to nowhere from a ruined world. Due to some unspecified apocalyptic event that humans were directly responsible for, their old world was completely destroyed, and these islands, specially protected by the Dark Dragon, remained as the sole safe haven for the few who survived. Right before the end of their previous world, what Leader calls a white ship provided passage for those spared. The people who arrived aboard the white ship feared a second Judgment Day more than anything, so, as to not repeat the same mistakes that caused the old world's annihilation, they all agreed to surrender their memories and store them inside of the mystical hummingbird egg we've been tasked with protecting, so that they could all start over by living life unsullied in pure innocence with newly imagined identities and roles. However, it was necessary for one individual to retain the truth, and naturally, because of Leader's distinguishing trait as a giant, he was selected to keep watch over them all and ensure that their real memories remained repressed indefinitely, revealing them only if they were ever needed again. And they were. Unfortunately though, Porky was likely given intel about Leader, so before he could warn anyone, he was discreetly locked away and isolated here, without much suspicion aroused. People were aware that Leader was gone, how could you not be? But they no longer knew his true purpose and didn't think much of his disappearance. Everyone has been happy, living their new lives in ignorant bliss. But then Porky stumbled upon this place in this era, using the phase distorter, called a time distorter in Leader's speech, which is probably the one he stole from the previous game. It allowed him to travel through the space-time continuum at will, a power he abused and now faces the consequences of. He's messed with the fabric of the universe so much that he's been granted immortality, but cursed in that he must live forever in a frail, withered body that houses his adolescent mind. This fact is made much more disturbing when considering Porky's fate, which we'll get to soon. Porky was apparently, and interestingly, shut out from all other times and spaces before landing on these islands, which would be an amazing side story in and of itself. I really like that while the way he and everyone else got here is explained well enough, it's all left purposely vague as to encourage theories and generate discussion. For example, we know that humans caused the end of the world, but we don't know exactly how. Was it a fallout from global nuclear warfare? Did some other man abandon their alien child who grew up to be a world eater worse than Gigas? While it's said that the Nowhere Islands are an impervious part of the previous world, world itself is an indistinct word that can be defined in a way that encompasses life beyond Earth. White ship, then, might be referring to a boat, but it could very well be a spaceship instead. Personally, I do think that all of Tazmily's residents evacuated from the world established in Mother 2. Back when the Nintendo 64 version of Mother 3 was cancelled, Itoi posted several screenshots of what could have been, with two pictures in particular displaying what looks like Fourside and Onett, Ness and Porky's hometown, in rubble. Much of what this game was supposed to be has been faithfully revived for the Game Boy Advance release, but perhaps Leader's explanation was initially a bit more show instead of all tell. That being said, As a result of how the story we got was presented, many types of conclusions can be drawn, as we'll see with the ending. This was by design, as Itoi believes that players add more than half of the meaning and value to video games, so that part they've contributed is entirely their own. He goes on to state that his personal feelings steer him to want to affirm everything the player thinks about the game. He wanted to make Mother 3 like a mirror, one that reflects the heart of the player off of the screen. I'm rambling on like an evil mushroom though, and this sewer is starting to stink more than EarthBound's advertising. So let's leave behind a broken facade to forever fester in filth and push past the ever-growing, mindless mob to make a break for the empire Porky building. Porky himself waits at the very top of this impractically cool and intimidating tower, using the opportunity to bully Lucas and stall time by controlling the elevator. It forces the party to stop and take detours through ridiculous floors, like this hall of toilets and the fan room I mentioned in the last video, which is its own secluded harem for half-dressed, most likely brainwashed girls to dote over him, by the way. Plus a lip-locking centaur, don't forget about that little detail. The next floor following all that absurdity is Facade's home. This is where a couple of major revelations are made. First of all, he's Locria, the Final Needle's guardian. I haven't brought this up yet, but the Magypsies were all interestingly named after musical modes by the game's composer, Shoko Sakai. Locria being the traitor of their group is genius, because the Locrian mode is infamously the most unstable and dissonant. The other shocking discovery here is that the fallen Magypsy actually kept a pet that he cared for and didn't abuse. This mouse was loved by the most abominable of villains, showing that even evil can have a soft side. Now that we're questioning everything we thought we knew, one of the last distractions is the nice person hot spring, which rivals only the Chimera Lab in how unsettling it is. These rows of capsules reveal that Porky took another page out of Gigas' book by entrapping people inside these green liquid tubes. Porky uses them more explicitly than Happy Boxes for indoctrinating the masses to become his loyal followers. This even extends to livestock, as soaking in the liquid makes them want to become a delicious meal for Porky. At this time, Lucas and company must be at the end of their rope, having to jump through the Pig King's hoops. The fun isn't over yet though, as they'll have to prove themselves to be suitable playmates by letting a mecha version of him win, but only by a razor-thin margin, as his ego must be properly stroked. Oh, and he tries to eliminate them all after with this natural killer cyborg abomination too. But behind that door lies a boat ride, showcasing a certain someone's memories, which finally takes us to his elusive throne room. Facade/Locria's needle is discovered towards the end of Porky's monologue, deep underground below where Lucas and his friends are standing. He abruptly activates a separate elevator in the middle of the room that sends them plummeting down 100 stories until they crash into the needle excavation site with no way of going back. As a quick note, the English fan translation team found lots of unused text linked to the elevator shaft, perhaps suggesting it was initially going to be a leisurely ride down, where everyone reflects back on Leader's speech. What is presumably Duster asserts that even though Wes might not be his biological father, the old man's definitely his real dad. Duster, Kumatora, and Lucas were also supposed to have come to the realization that all three of them are without mothers, giving this game's name an entirely new meaning. Moving along, the twins' father Flint was taken with them for the freefall, and now insists on running off ahead of the pack to confirm a suspicion that's been eating away at him. He's ultimately realized and come to terms with the fact that the masked man is the son he's been looking for since Chapter 1. Flint is the best of the bad fathers that plague the Mother series. These past few years, he's largely been absent from Lucas's life because he's been spending that time endlessly scouring the mountains on the notion that Klaus might still be out there, alive. We all know that his pursuit was in vain, as the pig masks found him first, probably already dead, but Flint is now relieved to have some sort of answer to his anguish. He's the one to tell Lucas for certain that Klaus has been found living, in some capacity, as Porky's robot. Both Lucas and Flint see the family member that was taken from them in the Masked Man. But Porky couldn't care any less. He has zero compassion for Klaus, scoffing at the fact that the monster he's created used to have a person's name. To Porky, Klaus is nothing but a means to an end. If that, and every other soulless deed this child dictator's carried out, doesn't make you want to end his reign, then you've been soaking in a certain hot spring for a little too long. So shake it off, as it's time to engage Porky in battle. As a nod to Gigas' fight, you'll have to fend off his inexplicable attacks until the spider mech carrying him powers down. This is the only way to actually defeat Porky, because as stated before, he can't die. Without a machine to fight for him, Porky cowardly ducks inside another. But this thing isn't built for fighting. It's called an absolutely safe capsule, and all it does is provide absolute safety from receiving or inflicting damage. Porky mentions that he's simply taking cover inside of it for the time being. What he doesn't realize, however, is that while he supposedly tricked Dr. Andernuts and the Mr. Saturns into making it for him, Dr. Andernuts thought ahead and designed it so that once a person seals themselves inside, it's impossible to exit. Worst of all is the fact that Porky is immortal, so he's trapped in here for all of eternity. He is now absolutely safe from the world, and the world is now absolutely safe from him. You can theorize all you want about Dr. Andernuts, or some other scientist in the far future, inventing a device that allows him to escape this eternal prison, but Itoy has confirmed that in 5.5 billion years from now, Porky will still be alive. So when the sun inevitably dies and Earth as we know it ceases to be, the absolutely safe capsule will still be keeping him safe. Which by extension has to mean that in hundreds of billions of years from now, when the universe itself may perish through heat death and decay, ripping apart, collapsing, or whatever fated cosmic horror awaits, the absolutely safe capsule will keep Porky alive. The existential dread of this is so significant and so interesting that I can't help but think about it from time to time. To put the weight of Porky's fate into perspective, try and picture yourself actually being trapped inside of this thing. It helps that there's a real-life product similar to it for natural disaster emergencies called a survival capsule. So look at this footage and imagine yourself isolated inside of there for one whole year, with nothing to do but gaze out of a tiny window, left alone with your own thoughts. You'd go mad. 1 year is an unfathomably long time to exist in this thing, right? Now, think about the prison sentence Porky's guaranteed to live out. We know for certain he'll at least be in there for 5.5 billion of those long years. So what's just 1% of that? 55 million years. The United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of Prisoners defines prolonged solitary confinement as a time period in excess of 15 consecutive days. Just 15 days, or a little over 2 weeks, in total isolation falls under their restriction as a cruel, inhumane, and/or degrading punishment. So what about all of Porky's time spent with zero human contact? I know there's a lot of fans out there that say, good, this is what Porky deserves. But truly sparing a moment to think about the horror that this entails is what Andernuts was talking about when he spoke with remorse. I don't think that any living thing, yes, even Porky, deserves this. I'm going to leave that conversation there though. If you're interested in hearing more on my thoughts about the matter and the changes Porky might go through inside of the capsule, I may just make it into a separate video later on. For now though, it's time to end our dark aspects of Mother 3 journey with what I think is the most somber moment to exist in a Nintendo game. A one-on-one fight to the death between brothers. When he is reached, the masked man tries to overpower everyone immediately with a mortal blast of lightning. Lucas's lightning deflective Franklin badge redirects it, but unlike last time, it only offers protection for himself. Your 3 other party members are knocked unconscious, and if any one of them is revived during the fight, the masked man will put them back down without hesitation. It's made obvious that this has to be an exclusive battle between brothers. Going in though, Lucas can't bring himself to attack, knowing that it's family standing in front of him. The conditioned Klaus's memories are deeply repressed though. According to Porky, he doesn't know anything about who Lucas is anymore, so this soon becomes a one-sided clash. with the older twin mercilessly beating down his forgotten brother. This encounter is a fight to keep Lucas alive. Heal, defend, just when it seems that Klaus won't ever let up. The voice of Hinawa, the twins' mother, calls out to the both of them to stop fighting. It fails to reach the masked man at first, but it eventually starts affecting him as his relentless attacks become weaker and weaker. Before his ruthlessness is assuaged though, he attempts to strike Lucas down with powerful Sai. But Flint jumps in front of the son he's neglected and takes the psychokinetic bullets for him. Thankfully, while they deal major damage, what level was he at when we last played as him again? 16? The damage doesn't kill him. It's effective in showing just how far gone Klaus is, and Flint's willingness to sacrifice himself makes it clear he does care about both of his sons equally, even though this is one of the only times in the game that he's shown it. Lucas, likely feeling an intense mix of devastation and rage, is only now confidently able to hit back. What's notable too is that the waving battle background made up of prominent angular shapes and bold colors changes the more the masked man begins to realize who he is. At first, it begins fizzling out like static on a television. Then, what was once rigid, focused intensity slows and loosens, while the stark palette softens to pastels, paired with the music that starts off erratic, with a distorted, distant version of the love theme that eventually becomes more heartfelt and pronounced. These cues are a solid indicator of his mental state throughout. If you haven't yet, I highly recommend listening to Battle Against the Masked Man outside of the game, with headphones on. Shogo Sakai expressed Klaus's internal struggle perfectly with this song. There are so many details, like one out-of-place note that trails off, and a piano riff that circles around and around as if to emulate the feeling of going insane. The sad echoes of the mother Lucas and Klaus prematurely lost is gradually getting through to him, made especially clear after a flashback plays out of the two boys as infants in their cribs. This wrecks Lucas too. Neither of them know what to do anymore, and now, trying to throw punches results in Lucas shutting his eyes and missing. Fighting to stay alive is no longer the main concern. It's evolved into a fight to hold back tears all around. The remaining lines of text that conclude this sequence hit harder than PK Love Omega, but the way that I, or anyone else describes them can never accurately put into words how impactful they are to experience in the moment. Hanawa saying, "Come to your mother. You must be so exhausted. Come here, Klaus." This line finally breaks him, and me too, as he removes his helmet to reveal a face that looks just like Lucas's. Klaus has finally regained control of his mind, but what if it's only temporary? In a prompt, decisive maneuver, Klaus fires an intense bolt of lightning at his twin, knowing very well that the Franklin badge would keep Lucas safe, but send the blast right back his way, killing him. Klaus is fatally wounded and staggers towards his brother, nostalgically embracing him for the last time as he dies in Lucas's arms. Many fans question why Klaus had to commit suicide, but I think there are several factors to consider here. First of all, Klaus's awakening could very well have been fleeting, so perhaps he used the opportunity to do what Lucas couldn't. He ended his own life to protect his family in case he reverted back. I think that's a likely possibility, but there are more. What if Klaus wasn't able to forgive himself for all that he's been made to do as the masked man? What if he was already dead when discovered and forcibly revived, so his soul was simply pining for a reunion with his mother? Whatever combination of the above is true, there is now nothing stopping Lucas from pulling that final needle and passing his heart onto the dragon. Lucas's life and the lives of all who believe in him are put on the line as the sacred seal is released skyward and the sleeping deity rises. In what is perhaps the most cinematic sequence the series has ever seen, the Nowhere Islands in its entirety is overcome by falling meteors, waterspouts, earthquakes, and eruptions enclosed by an inferno. No one is free from the unrestrained, unbiased destruction, as a Sohei castle is consumed by the earth, and a fleeing Pigmask airship is swiftly shot down. We catch just a glimpse of the cause for all of this, the Dark Dragon, as the screen violently shakes and fades out. Then, just 3 letters appear, E-N-D, followed by a question mark, suggesting there's more to see here. From this point, you can actually walk around as the end text and talk to others. It doesn't always reveal whom exactly you're talking to, but it's easy enough to guess based on their manner of speaking. We of course bump into Kumatora and Duster, but also familiar friends like Rope Snake and a Save Frog. You eventually touch something rolling around too, which is probably Porky inside of his capsule. Everybody from throughout the adventure greets you, the player, as yourself, to give their thanks and let you know that everything turned out okay. Everybody is apparently alive and well. What specifically happened is never elaborated on. We can only read about and piece together the fate of these characters as we navigate this void. But after an emotional credits crawl, the game leaves us with one final image, one last message, while a touching track plays in the background. In the first episode, I mentioned the meaning of the starting logo's uncomfortable blend of wood and metal, but here, a fully wooden logo with a healthy earth in place of the metallic sphere prominently displays itself. So what does this all mean? Well, when I first played the game, I actually envisioned this screen as some kind of afterlife. However, over time I've changed my view, and I now think that the Nowhere Islands were reset, cleansed of the Pigmask army and everything they've tainted. All of their technology, their chimeras, the brainwashed people and soldiers that fill out their ranks, purified. Porky himself may still be unaffected, of course, but everyone on the outside gets another go at a peaceful life on the islands before his meddling. I think this is implied by the true end screen, the befouled manufactured logo restored to a natural state. I don't think that Hinawa and Klaus were revived, but as stated before, if that's how you want the game to end, then you can interpret it that way, because Itoy deliberately left these plot threads just loose enough for that purpose. The ending of the N64 version was reportedly even darker, possibly absent of any indication that anyone's alright. But I think Itoy's vision of an ending that's as pure white as the morning after a long, dark night is entirely intact here. Quite literally too, as the backdrop against the newly revitalized logo is white, following our stumbling around in the pitch dark. To quickly touch upon how the final battle could have been darker, Itoy was, for Mother 64, thinking about alternatively just not having any dialogue whatsoever, kind of like in Chapter 6. There are a lot of unused backgrounds featuring disturbing imagery of Klaus within the final game's files, so are they a remnant of that idea, to tell Klaus's story through visuals alone? If that's the case, perhaps these striking drawings were later replaced with the minimalist designs, because Itoy realized that they could get the point across, and ultimately, he's able to convey more with the right words. This is all speculation, of course, but it's tough to imagine these being planned for anything but the Masked Man fight, much like these unused cutscenes. I could go on about the ending we could have received, but I think that overall, what we got here is such an effectively satisfying, heartbreaking, and exhilarating conclusion to my favorite game series. It's an ending you'll contemplate long after the credits roll, and I hope you'll continue to think about this series of videos long after I say goodbye. This has been the largest, most time-consuming project I've ever completed for the channel, and I'm happy that it's now out there in the world for all of you to interpret. If you join me for each and every episode, or just jumped headfirst into the finale here, you have my deepest thanks. I will be compiling all of these videos into one mega upload soon, so please look out for that. I hope we'll meet again for future videos covering both the Mother series and the dark aspects of Nintendo. Thanks.